Someone is holding a square frame with a token attached to it. She says that this is the end of the procedure, and this is an identification copper token. A guy in armor stands in front of a girl at the counter, who tells him that she hopes for his success as an adventurer. This guy is Rorin, a swordsman adventurer of the copper rank. A sword is visible behind his back. He says that they did not think that this day would come, but there is nothing to be done. Rorin leaves the girl with a sigh, who looks after him and thanks him. He was completely out of money. There are several people behind the counter, and documents are located on the shelves. The main character wonders why he is standing in front of the registration desk at the Adventurers Guild of this city. To understand, you need to go back a few days ago. Rorin recalls how as a child he stood with a sword in his hands next to the people he killed. He had been in the mercenary squad since he was a child. The main character is standing in front of some man, wearing a glove, and another man with a scar on his cheek is looking at him from behind. All this time, the guy continued to work there. They followed the war and went through countless victories and defeats. He's seen a lot of things in his life, but it looks like the end of their squad has come. A group of people with different weapons are walking forward together. There are bodies all over the ground, weapons and arrows lying around. They joined a previously winning battle, which ended in an unexpected defeat for everyone. Rorin looks away in shock. There are several houses. Somehow, the main character was able to escape, but split up with all his comrades, got to the city. Rorin stands in front of the Adventurers Guild, with a sign hanging over the door. Adventurers are just as much vagabonds as mercenaries in search of work. He examines the sign. It depicts a shield, on top of which lies a sword and behind a spear. It was enough to pay, no one would check, anyone could get this job. The guy looks at the guild building with folded arms. Of his possessions, he only had the armor on him, as well as a two-handed huge sword and a few silver coins. The guy is walking forward. The main character is heading towards the guild, because he really didn't want to wander just like that. Rorin looks thoughtfully at something. There is a counter behind him. The guy is standing in front of the bulletin board. He has a lot of questions. He sees tasks for killing, collecting, researching, cleaning, and more. Adventurers are jack of all trades. The main character looks at the token that the girl gave him. He reports that he is limited to requests of the copper rank. Besides, he is alone. Of course, this does not mean that he cannot do anything, but it will be much more dangerous alone. Rorin looks at different tasks where different conditions are specified. Rorin is thinking about taking up ditch cleaning. A guy comes up to him from behind and addresses him, touching his shoulder. Rorin turns to look at him. The guy with a smile asks the main character if he is really looking for a job. The guy says that Rorin seems to be an experienced swordsman, and it seems that he is the only one who is puzzled about choosing a job because there are not enough hands. Rorin looks at the boy with a serious face, listening to him. He invites him to join them. They have enough people, but the vanguard is not complete. Rorin thinks that if he were a mercenary, he would immediately refuse. A mercenary is a temporarily hired combat unit. He is completely free, no one covers his back, which means they can crush him because first they study the employer and his surroundings and then make a decision. However, there are exceptions. The main character holds his chin. The guy looks at him and says that the reward is higher than if he works alone. The main character is thinking with a serious face. There are exceptions when he has no money. There is a pot with a plan in front of the bulletin board. Rorin asks what the assignment is. The guy asks if he's interested after all. The guy stretches out his hand with a smile and informs them that they have a new one, and the 5 of them will fulfill this request. There are 5 people sitting at the table in the restaurant. The guy offers to introduce everyone. 3 girls are looking at him and Rorin. One is holding a staff. He talks about their newcomer, Rorin, who will now be in the vanguard with him. The main character says that he's glad to meet you. The guy tells about a short-haired girl and says that this is Nilan, his childhood friend who wants to become an experienced adventurer. Nilan is an adventurer thief of the copper rank. The girl with the staff is Okushi. She is a copper rank adventurer mage. She met him when they came to register and immediately put together a group. The guy says that Okushi can use magic 3 times a day. The girl is embarrassed. Rorin asks if it's cool. The guy offers to move on to getting to know the 3rd girl, apologizing to her for not dragging it out. She raises her hand and asks if she can introduce herself. The guy gives a positive answer. The girl gets up from the table and looks at the main character, who in turn looks at her. She says she's glad to meet him. The girl's name is Lapis. She is a priestess of the god of knowledge, although she has just received her destiny, so she is inexperienced. Lapis looks at the main character and says that we need to try together on this task. Rorin agrees with her. The guy informs that they also met Lapis after they arrived in the city and rely on her divine knowledge. The girl says that her limit is only 2 per day. The main character doesn't understand why the girl thinks it's not cool. The guy finally points at himself and tells them that he is the leader of the group, Safe, a swordsman adventurer of the copper rank. Someday he will be called a hero, so he advises them to remember the name. The girl says that this is for sure, because the Safe is the strongest in the whole wide world. The guy stands with his hands on his hips and asks not to praise him because he is embarrassed. He is so modest, as a hero should be. All the girls are listening attentively to the Safe, which says that the newcomer is now with them, so you can tell about his journey. Seifa was 6 years old when he found records about the hero in the archive. Rorin examines everyone present with the thought that the group is quite balanced. But apart from the vanguard, there are only girls here. There are almost no women among the mercenaries, but not because they are weak. The guy understands that there will be no problems. He looks at the mug and then at the Safe, which tells about itself. Rorin wonders how long his story will last, because several tens of minutes have passed. Rorin gets nervous. Seife says that's when he decided he would be a hero too. Rorin suggests that he finally talk about work. Nilan is angry at the main character and tells him that the most interesting thing will happen next, so let him not interfere with the Safe to tell. Rorin understands that when there are women in the group, there are certain difficulties in the relationship between men and women. The main character watches them and thinks that he was dragged into a dangerous group in many ways. They never started discussing the case. Rorin addresses the guys saying that he does not know how their finances are, but he has lost his job. He looks at the Safe and says that if something is offered, then he wants to talk about the case, asks what does not suit him. Seife smiles and says that since they were able to understand each other, then we can get down to business. Nalan looks at the guy and asks if they really need Rorin. She points her finger at the main character and asks that he is a former mercenary. It's okay that they will have a guy who is ready to do anything for money. Will everything be all right with the group? The guy says that this is a familiar attitude and that's how everyone sees mercenaries. Seife drinks something and looks at the upset Nalona, saying that she also agreed that they needed another person in the vanguard. The girl says she agreed, but offers to take someone else. Oakasi tells Nalan that it is unlikely that a suitable adventurer will join their group, which has no experience. There is a plus that they will have someone with them who, although there is no adventurer experience, but has real combat experience. Guys, I ask Lapis what she thinks about this. The girl sits silently and listens to them. She looks curiously at the main character and wonders what to say to her companions. Lapis says that he does not consider him such a bad person. Nalan says that this is life among priests. Lapis says so because he does not know mercenaries. The girl puts her hand on her chest and says that she really did not hear much about mercenaries in the church. Lapis smiles and admits that she can say it, and judging only by his appearance. The main character looks at the girl and then says that no one has to be in the group forever. This is a one-time job, so you can be patient. Safe looks at Rorin and informs him that if he doesn't mind, he would like the guy to join officially. Seife suggests getting down to business. The task is related to the extermination of goblins. They need to exterminate goblins in the forest near the village, located 3 days away to the east. The goblin horde is armed with various weapons. Nalan, with a dissatisfied face, asks if she is called Ayen. You cannot take this request, but accept a better task there. Oakusi asks again about the request to explore the discovered ruins and informs them that they cannot accept such a request because the guild offers this to more trusted groups. The girl says that in this case they will always get the cheapest job. Seife says with a smile that they will do such work and show results, the guild will give them large tasks. The main character asks how many goblins there are in total if they have a big gang. Seife admits that he doesn't know. Seife tells us that when the villagers encountered them while hunting, they ran away, no matter how many of them, they are goblins. Rorin looks at him in shock. Seife says they are not their opponents. The guy informs everyone that if there are no questions, then they will perform tomorrow. Rorin wonders if they're sure. Seife orders to prepare things for the trip. They will gather at the east gate tomorrow morning. The main character holds several coins in his hand. There is food for 3 days and overnight accommodation for today, but there is not enough for medicines. He looks at the hand with displeasure and then walks forward through the city with a huge sword on his back. The next day at the east gate, The main character came here before everyone else, holding a bag in his hands. The main character realizes that he seems to have come too early. A guard with a spear notices him behind him. He turns to Rorin and says that he has not seen him here before, whether he is here for work. The guy agrees with him and says that he is waiting for his comrades. The guard tells them that they have to get down to business in the morning. He's been watching here since morning. He wants to sleep. The guard asks the guy why he is so tired, if he has had time to rest. Rorin agrees with him. The man says that it's bad, because it's also working. The man points at himself with a smile and offers the guy to talk to cheer up. Otherwise, he is bored. He asks Rorin if this is his first time in Kaffa, and the guy asks if this is the name of the city. The guard is interested in the fact that the guy came here without even knowing the name of the city. Rorin says something just happened. People are going about their business on the street. The guard says that in this case he will say that this is not the capital, of course, but the city is good, the food is delicious, and the people here are good. This is his hometown. The man asks the main character about where he spent the night last night. The guy replies that it's around the corner on the right. The guard says that this place is old, but the food is delicious there, and suggests looking in after work. The main character thinks about the man's words that this is his hometown, and realizes that he does not have such a thing. Rorin remembers his band, as well as the fact that he roamed from one battlefield to another, and is interested in what it's like to settle in one place. The guy can't even imagine it, but he understands that it's probably not bad. The guard smiles. In the distance, the main character notices the safe, which waves to him and says that Rorin is already here. A guard with an angry face asks the guy if these are his comrades. Rorin admits that the comrades are for once. The man doesn't want to say anything bad, but he wants to express an opinion. He tells Rorin not to expect anything good from the group where the handsome man gathers girls. The guy understands that this is not an opinion, but envy. However, he agrees with the man. The man wishes Rorin good luck and leaves. The group approach the guy. Safe asks if he has been waiting for a long time. Everyone is holding bags and bags, and the main character is looking at his little bag. Saife says that once everything is assembled, then you can go. It takes 3 days to walk to the village. He suggests that the guys find a wagon, which they agree with. Rorin looks at them and wonders what they're going to do instead of walking. They ruined his entire training because he doesn't even have anything to pay with. The guy is horrified to realize that he can only follow the cart on foot, at what speed he will have to chase to keep up. Suddenly, the main character is very surprised by something. Lapis comes up to him from behind. The guy turns around. The girl puts a few coins in his hand, asking him that he has difficulties. Lapis looks at the guy with a smile and says that 10 coppers should be enough to get to Iron Village and return. The guy looks at the money without words. Lapis admits that it's a loan, let him take it, and have no doubt she's borrowing it now. She says that after that, maybe in the future he will help her out too. Lapis says it's such an investment. Who interrupts them with the words that they found the cart? Olakusi is already sitting in the cart, and Saif is shouting to the guys that they said they would deliver 5 coins to the village of Ain. The main character looks seriously at his money. He talks awkwardly about using them. Lapis happily leaves and says it's good. The girl turns around and asks the main character if they are going. The guy realizes that he suddenly got into debt. A cart is leaving the city, and there is a guard at the gate. The main character understands that it doesn't look good. The guys are sitting in a cart in front of a man in a hat who is driving it. They tell him that he helped them out. They were lucky that he agreed to give them a ride. The cart is traveling among fields and mountains. They say that it would be foolish to waste time and effort on hiking. The man in the hat smiles and reports that he sold the grain and now returns empty. He asks if they are the adventurers who will kill the goblins in the village. He waves at them and says that in that case he will deliver them as soon as possible. Everyone thanks him. Rorin thinks that in this case he could not have taken money for travel. The main character looks out the window through which the sun hits. The guys tell the coachman that they can leave the goblins on them. Rorin looks at Lapis, who is sitting with her eyes closed. Seife, Nalan, and Okushi are sitting next to each other, discussing something with a smile. The main character thinks about the fact that he would like to discuss their actions. However, it seems to be useless. The cart goes further down the road. Rorin hammers a nail into the ground, to which a rope is tied. He puts up the tent, turns to the old man and asks if it will go like this. The old man thanks the guy. The whole group, as well as the coachman with the cart, stands near several tents. They will spend the night here today and will set off at dawn, so they will reach the village before noon. The old man climbs into his tent, saying that he has gone to sleep. Seife tells him that they will rest too. Nalon reports that she is tired and her body hurts, climbing into the tent. Seife agrees with her, informing the main character that he and Rorin will be on guard. Rorin asks him if he means that they won't sleep together all night. Seife says it's too hard to stay up all night, so they'll change. The main character asks if there will be only one on guard. Isn't it logical when there is a team of 2 people on guard or reconnaissance? Rorin thinks about the fact that adventurers certainly kill monsters and robbers along the roads, but they're not going to sleep on the street, so shouldn't everyone be on duty? He looks at the safe, who asks if there are any objections. Nalon and Owakusi look angrily at the main character. Nalon tells him that the leader has told them what they will do, so let him keep quiet. Safe looks at the main character with a serious face. Lapis yawns, and the main character gets angry and closes his eyes. Rorin holds his side and says that it's just the 2 of them, so who will be on duty first? Safe offers him first, because he still wants to sleep. Rorin understands and says he will wake him up in the middle of the night. The main character is sitting dejectedly next to the tents in front of the campfire, looking at the fire and sighing. Suddenly, Rorin hears someone's voice and tries to figure out what it is. After that, he hears sighs and is surprised by it. Sighs come from one of the tents. Rorin is shocked that this is happening right on the street. Besides, the voices of 2 women can be heard there. The main character continues to sit in front of the campfire and wonders if they can't stand it at all, understands that they can't change. Rorin remembers that he did not sleep yesterday, and he cannot sleep soundly. Before there were always his comrades around, but now there is no one. His sword is lying next to him. Suddenly, he imagines himself among a bunch of his comrades, and food is being prepared on a campfire. The guy remembers all his friends and realizes that if they are still alive, then they can meet somewhere else, although the chances of this are not great. The main character looks into the distance with the thought that he would still like to believe that they are alive. Suddenly, someone asks the guy what happened to him. Out of surprise, he grabs the sword and stands up, but it's just a lapis. She looks at the guy in horror and asks if she scared him. The girl apologizes with words that she did not want to. Rorin looks at her in silence. Lapis tells him that she's being hindered by what is coming from the next tent. The girl tells him that she couldn't sleep. Rorin says it's a real disaster. Lapis sits down next to him in front of the fire. She looks at him with a smile and admits that she is not sure that she will fall asleep until this is over. She asks permission to sit with him. The main character looks at the girl with a serious face and asks her if this happens often, because they seem to be at work, although he understands the rush when there is uncertainty about whether tomorrow will be. Lapis denies this and says that I would like to say so, but still it is constant. In this, they are just very cheerful. I would like them to choose the place and time, but it seems she wants too much. The girl says that although God says that they should be fruitful and multiply, so in principle, they are doing the right thing. Lapis imagines a man with a mustache treating an injured guy who says he is in pain. Priests usually look very stern. There are stars in the sky. The guy asks the girl what kind of god she serves, because there are many of them. Lapis replies that he serves the god of knowledge, Kukulu. The gods are not people, they should be considered as pillars. The girl says she's not worried, but someone might not like it, so they should be careful. The guy thanks her and says that he is a mercenary, without education. Lapis listens to the main character, and then asks about why he became an adventurer. Rorin tells me that his squad is gone. The girl awkwardly apologizes to the guy. The main character answers her that it's okay, because this is a common thing. Rorin clenches his fist and talks about how they win and lose. It's just that this time his squad was unlucky and they were defeated. He could have joined another squad and continued, but he ran away, and he had nowhere to go from this city. It was the only way to earn money. The girl thinks about his words and gets upset, after which she turns back and notices his sword. Lapis guesses that Rorin seems to be very strong. The blade of this huge sword is about the same as her waist. The main character takes his sword and then stands up and starts waving it, which makes the girl surprised. Rorin examines his sword. The guy puts the sword on the ground. Lapis says that he is very strong and she was surprised. Rorin says that this is a two-handed weapon, but it's not always possible to hold it with 2 hands, so he trains to use it with only 1 hand. The main character asks the girl if she wants to compare. Lapis agrees. The guy asks if she is sure, and then places the sword vertically next to her. The sword turns out to be taller than the sword. The girl looks at the main character and asks him if she is thinner than the sword. The main character compares her and the sword and tells her with a serious face that she is thinner. The main character notices that Lapis's waist is narrower than a sword, but the hips are still thicker. Lapis looks back in surprise and asks if this is true. The main character says that without a doubt the sword is bigger. Lapis says it's obvious. Rorin thinks about the fact that her hips are bigger than a sword. The sun begins to appear from behind the mountains. Rorin tells the girl that dawn is coming soon. Lapis looks at the sun and says that they were so busy and didn't notice. Rorin apologizes to her for having to sit with him all night, which is a common thing for a mercenary. The girl objects because she was very interested. The guy suggests that Lapis get ready. She agrees. Saif and two girls with sleepy faces come out of the tent. Saif asks that it's already morning. What about his shift? Saifa asks the main character why he didn't wake him up. The main character asks him not to worry because everything is fine. The old man says that everyone is awake, so they move out as soon as they eat. There is nothing left to the village. Lapis and Rorin look at him. The guys put out the fire. The main character thinks about the fact that when this job is over, he will find another way to earn money. The old man informs them that they have arrived. In front of them is the village of Ain. The cart arrives at a village with several houses surrounded by a fence. Lapis looks at the forest and reports that the forest around the village is quite dense. The main character says that most likely the goblins came from there. Rorin understands that they need to listen to the witnesses in order to reduce the search area. Seife, with a confident face, suggests going to the forest. The main character asks the guy to wait, saying that before that, after all, something needs to be done. Rorin informs that since this is a request from the village, it may be worth saying hello to the village head because it's normal to find out about all the circumstances of the task. The guy says that you need to know the number of enemies and their position. In order to make a strategy, you need information about what kind of job it is, if they don't even meet with the employer. Nalan glares at the main character and informs him that he is very noisy. Saif looks at the girl. Nalan asks that they need to kill goblins. What else needs to be confirmed? Because the person who brought them can also inform about them. How long will it take to exterminate goblins in general? Nalan asks the main character not to underestimate the work of the adventurers, and Rorin mentally asks which of them still underestimates her. Even the commander of the mercenaries, despised by her, considered it a common thing to meet with the employer. The old man asks them to calm down, because he will talk to the village headman and they must destroy the goblins. The girl looks at the main character passing by and smiles maliciously, after which Saif comes up to her and touches her head. Saife says that he will go ahead of the formation. Nalan will go in the center and will cover the Lapis and Oakusi supporting him, and Rorin is the last one. He must be on guard. The guy points his finger back into the forest and, with a smile, offers the guys to do the job and let the residents breathe a sigh of relief, orders them to go into the forest. Nalan reports that they will be able to cope without any nervous mercenaries like Rorin. Okushi looks at the girl with displeasure and tells her that someone has to act as a shield during the fight, so they can't give it up. Lapis looks at the main character with a smile and informs him that if he gets hurt, she uses healing magic. The girl stands next to Rorin, and Nalan says that there is nothing to transfer the magic of treatment just like that. Let her use it if the safe gets hurt. Lapis pretends to agree with her. In the end, they went into the forest without learning anything about the goblins. An old man looks after them. They will have to wander aimlessly here. They are just wasting their time, not knowing where to look. Nalan turns to the safe. The girl bends down to a bush with berries and asks the guy if it's a raspberry. Saif replies that they haven't eaten raspberries for a long time and suggests that she collects some. Okushi bends down and collects flowers, calling them donkey and saying that there is a lot of it here, and it will be possible to use it for materials. Lapis stands awkwardly in front of the guys who have started doing other things, trying to remind them that the goblins must be exterminated first. The girl looks at them worriedly. Everyone has run away. She is left standing alone. The main character realizes that the goblins are here somewhere. Without any clues, he will just have to wander through this forest until he finds something. Upset, Lapis approaches the main character, who tells her that let them do what they want. He doesn't care. He thinks that maybe the goblins will find them themselves and come. Lapis sighs and says that Mr. Rorin has given up. Rorin asks her if she has given up yet. She replies that it's a little unpleasant, but the guy says that she'll manage somehow. The girl looks at Rorin, the guy looks questioningly back. Lapis makes an offended face and admits that she is not pleased when he constantly pokes her. The main character looks at her in shock, and then questioningly calls her Mrs. Lapis, to which she replies that you can just call her by her first name, asks why she is so uncertain. The guy says that he has never addressed girls by name. Rorin tells her that in that case she should just call him Rorin. The girl denies and says that she will call him Mr. Rorin. The guy looks at Lapis in disbelief. The girl is embarrassed and waves her hands, saying that she does not want to say that she is trying to distance herself from him by saying so. The main character looks at the girl with a smile and asks her to address him in the way that is more convenient for her. The girl calms down after these words. Lapis smiles and agrees with the main character, still calling him Mr. Rorin, who looks at her with folded hands. Suddenly, Rorin turns back, then reaches for the hilt of his sword, sees glowing eyes in the dark. The main character with a serious face holds his sword and stands behind a tree. Lapis looks at him. The girl asks the guy about what happened, after which the girl picking berries is surprised by something. Nalan looks to the side. Okushi and Saife are standing behind. She reports that she heard something. Rorin removes the cloth from his sword, realizing that the goblins are approaching. The main character dropped the cloth to the ground and stands in a fighting stance, pointing his sword forward, while a worried Lapis stands behind. Saife eats berries and asks Nalan if she heard monsters. The girl says she doesn't know, but she heard some kind of sound. All three of them are standing next to each other. Saife looks at the girl questioningly, while several arrows fly in their direction, one of which plunges into the Okushi. Nalan and Saife turn to look at the wounded Okushi, while two goblins with a club and a sword run towards them. The main character rushes forward and asks them why they look away from the enemy. The guy swings his sword, causing the goblins to fly apart, dropping their weapons. Lapis asks if he needs a protection spell. The guy refuses it. Rorin strikes two more goblins with his sword, chopping off their hands. The guy manages to react and repel the arrows flying at him with his sword. He does not understand where they are from and looks deep into the forest. He looks to the side and realizes that this place is unsuitable for close combat. He sees a dagger in the hands of a dead goblin, but understands that at least a short sword would be better. The main character throws the dagger aside, after which it falls into the goblin's hand with a bow, from which he screams. The guy thinks the dagger didn't go deep. Saife just manages to get his sword out at this time, looking at the goblins who are running away. A wounded Okushi is sitting next to him. The guy stands with his back to the main character and informs him that since the goblins are running away, then you need to go after them. Rorin reports that although no one cares about his opinion here, but still it may not be worth following them like a rabbit. Saife asks the guy what he is talking about, because they themselves accepted the task of exterminating goblins. Nalan stands next to the guy who says that they have finally found a clue, so you need to go after them, because if they do not destroy their lair, they will not complete the task. Nalan shouts at Rorin to stop acting like a mercenary. The girl angrily turns to the guy and tells him that the leader ordered to chase, so let him chase. Rorin thinks with a displeased face that the task does not say anything about destroying the lair. Lapis is standing nearby. The main character says that their comrades have gone ahead. The girl agrees with this and says that the best position for her is here. Lapis closes her eyes and raises her finger up, saying that warriors must protect priests and magicians. Mr. Safe is with Okushi now, so she will stay with Rorin. The main character looks at her questioningly and asks if she is sure. The girl answers that yes, if he does not mind. The two of them walk along the path. The guy hides the sword behind his back, after which he notices the goblin's blood on the ground and realizes that these are such obvious traces. Rorin looks at Lapis and informs her that he wants to know her opinion on how strong this group is, especially he wants to know how good their main swordsman is. There is a goblin with a club. They need to exterminate goblins, and among all living creatures, they just multiply and grow incredibly fast, although the guy heard that even a simple person can kill such a weak monster. The main character thinks about it and reports that the main weapon of the goblins is their numbers. They do not have the strength to deal with them in one fell swoop, so a strategy is needed. Rorin recalls how Long Seif reacted and reports that, based on their actions and the slowness of the reaction, it is difficult to expect something like this. The guy says that he can only rely on strength, but asks the girl how good he is. Lapis thinks about it and asks if Rorin is a former mercenary, and then remembers Hellfire Swordsman and Cutting Wind. The girl tells the guy that he has probably heard about an incredibly strong mercenary called the demonic swordsman. The guy looks at her. He says he's heard the name before. Only death awaits enemies when meeting him, and victory awaits allies. He is a legendary swordsman who would not like to meet on the battlefield as an enemy. The main character's face becomes scared. He asks the girl if she wants to say that the safe is just as good. Lapis thinks about it. The guy imagines how a lot of safes are fighting with a demonic swordsman and says that even if there are 10 million safes, they will not be able to cope with a demonic swordsman. Rorin asks if they are so self-confident or just crazy. The girl says that Rorin is in the same position now. The guy apologizes and says that he has money problems, so he's probably crazy. The main character leans against a tree and says that wherever you spit, you will have to get into debt everywhere. Lapis asks if he can only sympathize. The guy doesn't understand why it's in a question form. They notice someone. Seife stands behind a tree in front of a cave entrance and guesses that this may be a goblin dwelling. He says that the traces of blood lead to the cave. Nalon could not be mistaken either. Rorin says that the cave is too small for two. The main character understands that he will not be able to wield his sword there. He asks the safe if he wants to enter. Personally, he would refrain. Nalon angrily waves his hand and says that then he can return, but do not count on a reward. Seife claims that their enemies are only goblins, so everything will be fine. He holds out a smaller sword to Rorin and says if he's worried, he can take this one. The main character looks at the broken sword in places. Seife says that he picked it up, decided that it might be useful. Rorin holds the sword and thinks that it's better than nothing after all. Everyone gathered together. Seife asks Okushi to light the way with magic and let Nalon check what's around. They look at the dark entrance of the cave. Their leader informs them that if there are no more problems, then they go in. Okushi closed her eyes and pointed her hand forward, holding the staff in the other, turning on the lighting. The main character looks at her with displeasure and wonders if it is okay to spend valuable magic on this. It was impossible to turn on a torch or use a lamp. Nalon informs the safe that there are no traps or traps. Safe says that there may be kidnapped people there. They need to be rescued as soon as possible. The main character gets angry and closes his eyes, wondering how they got such confidence, because there's probably an ambush inside. Rorin raises his head up, thinking that most likely there are traps there after all. Safe offers to go. The main character sighs and heads to the entrance of the cave, along with Lapis. In front are Seife, Nalon, and Okushi, who lights the way. Safe wonders if they were running away in a hurry, if they were lucky that they didn't leave any sentries. Lapis claims that they are only brainless goblins after all. If they are injured, they don't even think about leaving the guards. Rorin wonders if they're moving too fast. Lapis asks the guy what he thinks. The guy claims that it's definitely a trap. That's why they didn't leave any sentries. Lapis asks if goblins are that smart. The main character says that he is not familiar with goblins, but even monkeys leave someone to watch. Lapis thinks about it. The guy says he doesn't think goblins are dumber than monkeys. Lapis is interested in whether there is a difference in the intelligence of monkeys and goblins, because monkeys form communities, use tools, and are not so much different from humans. Rorin wonders if it bothers her now, but she's a priestess of the god of knowledge. Maybe that's the point. The guy looks ahead. The safe has stopped. Lapis asks the guy standing in front of the turn what happened. He reports that there is a room ahead. He sees lights. Rorin realizes that the enemies can see their fire too. Nalon asks Okushi if this is a goblin ambush. The girl replies that it will be bad if there are archers there. Seife says that he will go first and shoot back arrows, and Nalon and Okushi will follow him. Rorin thinks with displeasure that they will go straight into an ambush. Such courage can only be admired. In his humble opinion, this is a form of suicide. Okushi reports that he uses protective magic. The safe relies on her. One of the 3 magics available per day is spent on a frontal attack. Lapis asks the main character if he thinks it's not enough. The guy says he doesn't know. The girl asks Rorin what he would do in this case. The guy imagines that he would have laid the entrance with fresh branches and grass and then set it on fire. He claims that the exit will block the fire, and the heat and smoke will fill the entire cave, the easiest way of all. Lapis says that oil is needed for this. It is difficult to ignite with one raw tree, no flint, no oil, nothing can be done. It is worth giving up and returning. The main character understands that such leadership is no good. It is very difficult without money. Someone calls Rorin, who looks up. Safe looks at the guy with a sword in his hands and tells him that Rorin will go with him. However, Rorin says that magic does not actually protect him. Owakusi, with a serious face, says that he has a hefty sword, so he can use it as a shield. Nalan angrily confirms her words. Rorin understands that in such a narrow cave he cannot even be pulled out, and if they try to defend themselves, then taking into account the size and weight, the sword will only get in the way. Saif apologizes and says that it will not be possible to put 2 protective spells, but it has already been put on him. Rorin says it means he's out of luck. He understands that he must somehow survive and looks at his sword. The Saif jerks into motion and shouts that it is necessary to go forward. Rorin looks at him in shock, and then says that he screamed so much that he notified all the enemies. Well, since they've notified everyone that they're coming, now we'll have to fight. Several goblins are standing, preparing to attack. Saif and Rorin stand back to back and fight off the arrows flying at them. They continue to fend off a hail of arrows, and then the main character notices that the Saif does not repel the arrows, but they bounce off themselves. Magic is a convenient thing. Saif confidently points his hand forward and shouts that now they will kill all the goblins. However, suddenly, the guy falls to the ground, causing his sword to fly away from his hands. The goblins aim at him. The main character looks at the guy in shock, not understanding what happened, and all 3 girls are also looking in his direction. Some holes appeared under the feet of the lying guy. His face becomes scared. His comrades look at him from behind. Nalan looks at the Saif in horror and shouts his name. She is going to rush to his aid, but Okushi tries to stop him. Lapis also wants to run after them. The main character looks at her in horror. He manages to grab her. Don't let her run away. Nalan kneels down next to Seife and asks him to get up. Seife groans in pain. Okushi lies next to him. The main character notices potholes on the ground and realizes that it was a trap. He shouts to his comrades to be careful. A whole crowd of armed goblins comes out of the passage, in the middle of which stands someone in a hood. Nalan is trying to cure Saif. On the goblin side, there is someone with a head on their shoulders. In the library, a small Saif sits in front of the bookshelves with a book in its hands. He looks at it and thinks that the book is very cool, and the character from it is very cool, a real hero. The boy continues to read and says that he also wants to be like this, travel and perform feats. Saif stands with his sword pointing upwards. He thinks he will become an adventurer who will be called a hero. There is a girl standing next to him who looks at him with a loving look. Nalan looks towards the goblins and shouts at them, asking how they dare at all. Several goblins with bows shoot towards Nalan and the Saif, which makes the girl very scared. The girl starts screaming in fear and waving her hand with a dagger, hoping to repel the arrows. Saif looks at it in horror. The arrow crashes into the guy's chest, causing him to scream. Saif glares at the goblins and calls this situation a curse. The guy looks at the goblins, not understanding how this happened. This can't be, because it's just goblins. The main character asks about the higher form, the leader of the goblins. He sits next to Lapis and talks about how he really is bigger than the rest of the goblins. The girl presents a silhouette in a hood and tells that sometimes someone special appears among the goblins. He may have been an ordinary goblin from birth, but he has changed after gaining experience. He is many times more dangerous than ordinary goblins. Since he is carrying a staff and dressed like this, then most likely he is a goblin magician. He has the power and knowledge to use magic. Among the higher, he is considered one of the most dangerous. The main character looks fearfully at the goblin magician and informs him that it is better not to fight against such a person without preparation, asks if it is better to approach him. Lapis remembers about the Saif and the others. Saif and Nalan are sitting on the ground. Arrows are stuck in the ground next to them. They are unable to stand up. Rorin hears something behind him and turns around in fright. He tells Lapis that they are coming from behind, so they need to retreat. Okushi gathers his strength and stands in front of Nalan. The angry girl informs the goblins about what they will get from her. Some patterns appear around the staff of Okushi. She demands that the loose sand carry sleep. Quicksand is moving in circles ahead of the girl. The girl stands in a fighting pose and repeats the word, dream. The goblin magician holds on to the amulet around his neck, and with his other hand holds on to the staff. The amulet begins to glow. A flash of light coming from the goblin amulet begins to illuminate the entire cave, from which the main character closes his eyes with his hand. Rorin looks at the goblin in shock and tries to figure out what kind of light it is, after which Lapis falls to his knees next to him. The main character puts his hand on her back and looks at her questioningly. The guy asks her what's wrong with her. The girl's face is scared. The guy continues to stare at the goblins in shock. It's not clear why, but none of them fell asleep. The goblins are coming forward. Seife, Nalon, and Okushi stand in front of the goblins, who are heading in their direction. Someone asks them to stop and not approach. Goblins grab Nalon and Okushi, which frightens them. Seife angrily shouts at them not to touch the girls. After his words, one of the goblins hits the guy in the face, causing him to lean back and fall to the ground, blood flowing from his head. The wounded guy lies unable to get up. A piece of an arrow sticks out of his chest. Seife thinks that this cannot be. Terrified, the girls try in vain to escape from the hands of the green monsters, asking them to let them go. Seife looks at this with the thought that he was supposed to be a great hero. Several goblins begin to beat the guy with a weapon, from which blood splashes in all directions. The main character sees a light in the tunnel. The main character looks at the passage with a serious face and thinks that they can no longer be saved, and the escape route is blocked. The guy looks at Lapis and supports her hand with his, asking her if she can still move. The girl does not answer. Bowing her head down in despair, Rorin asks her about what happened, if all her strength has left her. The guy turns around at the sounds made by the goblins. He realizes that they are also coming from behind, so they will definitely be squeezed. The main character does not understand what to do now. Lapis looks at him and then turns away and closes her eyes. The girl asks the guy to just leave her. Rorin thinks about her manner of speech. Lapis asks if she is a hindrance, and he alone will somehow cope. Lapis looks down in despair and claims that the goblins will not kill the women immediately, but the man will be killed immediately. Lapis informs him that in that case, let him leave her and leave. The guy keeps holding her. The guy silently looks at the girl who is waiting for his answer. Rorin says he understood everything, removing his hand from the girl's shoulder. The main character turns his back on the girl and seems to be about to leave, which is why Lapis smiles. However, suddenly, the girl is surprised by something. She looks back questioningly, because the main character grabs her with his hand and asks her to be quiet. Rorin glares ahead and holds a small sword in one hand, telling the girl that otherwise she will bite her tongue. The guy remembers the girl's words that the best position for her is with him, calls him master. He remembers her joyful face. She tells him that she is currently borrowing from him, and in the future he will help her out. Rorin takes the girl by the arm and looks forward, asking the girl to be patient because she will shake. He looks at the light in the tunnel and starts running there. The guy with the menacing face moves forward with the idea that he will have to act. Lapis looks at him in surprise. The main character with the girl in his arms breaks through the goblins, who look after him. The guy notices the corpse of the safe next to the goblins, after which his expression turns gloomy. Several goblins begin to pull the bowstring, aiming at the main character. Arrows fly straight at the main character to meet him. However, Rorin manages to dodge one arrow that flies right next to his face, and the guy dodges the rest of the arrows with the same success. Running past the goblin archers, Rorin swings the sword that Seife gave him, after which he cuts off one of the goblin's hand. Lapis gets sick, and she sighs. The guy asks her to be patient. Rorin notices the goblin mage in front, and realizes that since the road is blocked from behind, he remains to go forward, the passage behind the goblin mage. The main character cuts off the head of another goblin, heading forward with the idea that he will run there. However, the hooded goblin points a finger at him, on which fire appears. The goblin continues to point his finger at Lapis and Rorin, after which a fiery projectile flies towards them. Rorin looks ahead in horror, guessing that it is a fire bullet. It is very fast. The bullet cuts into the guy's shoulder. The hooded goblin starts laughing, looking towards the guy who is leaning down, after which the goblin gives a questioning laugh. The main character raises his head, continuing on his way, running towards the goblin magician. The goblin magician begins to conjure a new fire on his finger. Rorin runs at him, shouting that he will not make it in time. The main character, being next to the goblin, makes a sword strike from above until he managed to shoot a fiery projectile. Blood sprays, and the amulet falls from the goblin's neck. Rorin looks in surprise at the amulet with a broken rope flying off to the side, after which he catches it with his hand. They run past the goblin's dead body. Lapis looks at the amulet in the guy's hand and says she wants him to throw it away. The guy moves forward with her in his arms and sighs, asking her not to talk. The main character turns back and realizes that he somehow made his way, but it is unknown when they will give chase, so you need to break away from them. The guy thinks that, however, he could only do this, and now they are only moving away from the exit. He wonders if it is good that he will wander deeper into this cave. Rorin closes his eyes tensely. He can only hope that there is a workaround, and it's too dark ahead. The main character looks at the girl he continues to carry and realizes that this debt is costing him too much. Rorin continues to run, stomping loudly. The girl praises the guy for running smartly in such darkness. Rorin asks the girl to shut up because she distracts him. Lapis admits that it is exhausting when she is dragged around like some kind of bag. The guy says that if anyone is tired here, it's him, so if she wants to live, let her keep quiet. The girl agrees with him and says that she will do so. Suddenly, the main character notices a light on his chest and looks at it in surprise, trying to figure out what it is. Rorin looks up at the top, and Lapis asks if he can see now. The guy mentally wonders if it's magic. The girl asks him to stop carrying her around like luggage. Lapis says that she does not ask him to wear her like a princess, but at least she deserves better treatment. The main character does not understand what she wants. The guy puts the girl on his back. Lapis smiles and confesses to him that it's much better this way. The girl turns to Mr. Rorin and with a calm face thanks the guy for saving her, which makes the guy surprised. His face becomes displeased, and he realizes that she is talking in the old way again. The girl asks the guy about why he did it. Lapis remembers the guys and reminds the main character that he abandoned the others. The main character answers her that he just wanted to. She's just lucky because he owes her money. The guy asks the girl to choose the answer that she liked, because any of them will be correct. The girl asks Rorin if this is all because he is just kind. The guy says that in that case he would not have abandoned everyone else. Lapis reports with a smile that he saved her, so she will consider it that way. The guy tells the girl that she can do what she wants. The guy reminds her of what happened. The girl asks what happened. The main character recalls that her speech has changed, whether it was a dialect. Rorin thinks about what happened to her body and asks the girl why she suddenly stopped moving. The girl asks if she is obliged to tell this. The main character continues to carry Lapis on his back and informs her that if she doesn't want to, she cannot talk, but maybe she will come up with something. The girl says that since he has already seen it, she will tell. Lapis asks Mr. Rorin if he knows anything about demons. The guy looks at her questioningly and thinks about it. The girl recalls many races and tells that in addition to people, representatives of other non-human races and semi-animals live in the world. Among them, there are demons. The opinion of others about demons is not at all the best. Lapis represents a dark silhouette and says that demons are physically developed, knowledgeable in magic. They are not interested in other races. They associate with others only for their own benefit. That is, their reputation is not the best. The man is drinking something from his mug. There are not so many demons among people. They have a completely different mindset. Comrades from the squad told me that it is better not to deal with them. There are two people standing in front of the building. Demons do not believe in God. From the point of view of the church, demons are considered something vile. Demons can be distinguished from humans by their bright purple eyes. The demon is on fire. The world shudders before the demon lord, although he does not try to conquer the world. The girl finishes her story about demons and says that they are such a race. Lapis confesses that she is a demon herself. Rorin looks at the girl in shock and asks her if she is joking. The main character tells her that she is a priestess. After that, he looks at her and realizes that her eyes are not purple. The guy looks in shock at Lapis, who claims that she does not believe in the supreme god or Mother Earth. However, demons have a certain inclination towards the god of knowledge. Lapis says that he teaches only to learn new things and thirst for knowledge, and magic also refers to knowledge. It can use divine spells, that is, the power of God and magic. Other gods assume divine spells, and magic becomes impossible to use. The guy understands where the magic of light came from. Rorin realizes that Lapis is a magician and a priestess, two in one. He asks if the human priests of the god of knowledge can use magic. Lapis replies that maybe someone can. The girl brags and says that she does not think that anyone is able to use magic the way she does, because, after all, she is a demon. Naturally, their abilities are much higher than those of humans. The guy mentally agrees with her, because if it were possible to use everything at once, everyone would become priests of the god of knowledge. Rorin asks about why the demon became an adventurer. The main character asks that the demons of the post do not contact others and live in the mountains in the middle of the continent. The guy represents the mountains. He had heard that the peculiarity of the area was one of the reasons why demons hardly communicated with other races. It was quite difficult to get inside and get out. Lapis admits that many of them live in the outside world, people just don't notice them. The guy asks if it's true. The girl says that they are not very different from people. They remain cautious and disguise themselves as them. We do not specifically use skills above the norm. Lapis admits that they also limit their powers. The main character is surprised and asks her about it again. The girl says that this may explain her current condition. Lapis points her hand forward. The guy looks at her. The main character is surprised that Lapis can already move his hand, but the demon girl admits that the hand is artificial. The guy asks her again. Lapis admits that her limbs and eyes are subtle magical tools. The girl says that she moves them with the help of mana. For this, a large amount of strength is spent. She asks Rorin if he saw that Okushi was unable to activate magic. Lapis recalls the goblins and says that it was most likely the effect of mana depletion of the goblin magician. It is difficult to use such a thing in the square. This is not the kind of magic that goblins can use. It is probably some kind of magical tool. Rorin shows the girl the goblin mage's amulet and asks her if it is a magical tool. Lapis says that most likely it is. She does not know where the goblin got it from. Fortunately, she will not be able to use it all the time. She says it will take some time to move again. The girl is relieved to say that at least she has retained the ability to control her eyes. Rorin understands that this is why she asked him to throw away the amulet, but the main thing is that it doesn't work now, so you can keep it with you. The main character remembers one more thing, asks the girl what is wrong with her speech. Lapis replies that this is not a local dialect. The way she talks, it's just her usual speech. Because of the depletion of mana, she can't move her arms and legs. Being in danger, her consciousness itself switched to combat mode. Rorin says that he also has a psychological state during battle and in peacetime, but why does the conversation and character change? Because it's a little too much. The main character continues to carry the demon girl on his back, thinking that some oddities are coming. The girl says that when she offered to leave her, it was the best solution. Lapis thanks the guy for not listening to her and continued to carry her. The main character looks at the girl in surprise. Lapis says that although demons have a bad reputation, they do not forget good deeds. Rorin says he understands everything. He says that she can repay later, but in the meantime, we need to get out of the cave somehow. The girl smiles and asks the guy if he thinks that the cave is abnormal. She thinks that they have already gone far from the place where the goblins attacked them. However, the end of the cave is still not in sight. Lapis thought that goblins live in a natural cave, but she is definitely abnormal. The guy agrees with her. Along the way, they encountered many rooms that were used by goblins, but if they had passed through here before, then in the worst case, they would wander here forever. They should have reached the end and then turned back, looking for a workaround, but it doesn't look like the corridor will come to an end. The corridors here are too monotonous for a natural cave, as if they were specially made like this. The main character asks the girl if they can return, but the girl realizes that then they will have to go through that room Rorin strains. Rorin says it would be better if there was a way out on the other side. Lapis says that if there is a way out, then Rorin is a real lucky guy. The guy says that she should not hope for luck to begin with. Lapis admits that she is also unlikely to meet his expectations. Lapis wants to say something. The guy looks at her questioningly. She tells us that when she left the land of demons, these limited limbs and eyes were given to her by her parents instead of her. The guy is shocked by this. Lapis remembers the silhouettes of her parents. The girl mingled with the crowd and became an adventurer, and then found herself this group. Rorin says he understands and says she is more unlucky than him. Lapis says that she was very lucky that there were frivolous and careless people around her who couldn't figure out who she was. The guy says that she doesn't have to tell, remembering their group. The girl's eyes are watering. She tells that her parents hid her hands, feet, and eyes somewhere in the lands of people. She studies the world of people. She will not be able to return home if she does not find eyes and limbs. The guy says he didn't want to have a contest for a loser. The girl says that if she can still find them, she can make them a part of herself again. Rorin says that in this case, she should return to her homeland and ask her parents about everything. The girl looks at the main character in surprise. Lapis turns to Mr. Rorin and points his finger forward, where a light can be seen in the dark. The girl asks if there is a dead end, or maybe there are goblins there. Rorin says there's no light in the dead end, and there don't seem to be any goblin tracks. The main character asks the girl to dim the magic light. The main character asks Lapis if she can still stand. The girl apologizes for being a hassle. The guy says that it's okay, apologizing in advance for the fact that if there is danger, he will dump her. The guy says that he would like to do without a sword. They are heading towards the light at the end of the tunnel. They approach it and look down, seeing a hole through which light penetrates. The guy says it's a dead end and just a crack through which the light is visible. Lapis looks at the gap and says that maybe she could somehow squeeze through on all fours. However, her arms and legs barely work. Besides, climbing through a hole that leads nowhere alone is a bad idea. Rorin imagines her getting stuck there. Rorin asks if he can break down the wall and widen the passage. The guy puts the girl on the ground. Rorin says that he will make a little noise. You need to make sure that no one comes. Lapis asks you to rely on her. The main character takes his big sword and looks at it, thinking about whether he will manage before the pursuers arrive. The guy hits the gap from top to bottom with his sword, which makes it higher because it breaks at the edges. The guy says that with such strength of the sword, he will definitely cope somehow. He continues to diligently break the passage. The main character bowed his head from fatigue and looks at the gap, saying that now it will be possible to get through. The girl praises Rorin that he did a great job, although it took a decent amount of time. The main thing is that the pursuers did not show up. Rorin picks up Lapis and apologizes, saying that he will climb first and then drag her in. Lapis says it's okay because they're in the same boat. The main character climbs through the gap and looks forward. Later, when his torso appeared on the other side of the gap, he realized that he was tired. He looks ahead to look around. The guy is surprised by something he saw, and then notices how Lapis is trying to crawl through the gap with size. The main character climbs back a little and pulls the girl's hand to help her squeeze through. The guy grabs Lapis by the hand, which surprises her. He successfully drags the girl outside, after which she sighs. Lapis thanks the main character, but the guy says that there is nothing to thank him for. The guy says that he needs her opinion. After his words, the girl's face becomes serious. Lapis looks ahead at the guy, who points his finger back and asks what she sees there. There is a room behind it. The main character asks the girl what it is. Lapis looks at it in surprise and says it's amazing because it's a mana building material. The guy asks what it means. Lapis says that the building material used by the ancient civilization, its manufacturing method is unknown, but it can absorb mana from the air and transform into light. The girl stands amazed at what she saw, while the main character thinks about this ancient civilization. There is a magician in a cap, and with a staff in his hands. It was a country that flourished once upon a time. They excelled in magic and ruled most of the world. It is said that humans, half-breeds, and demons were its inhabitants. All the influential people there were magicians. Their cities were flying in the sky. However, one day the country was gone. The inhabitants scattered. Perhaps they gathered here and there, creating their own states. The main character asks if this is an ancient ruin. Does it mean that it costs a fortune? As a result, this place will be plundered by the Adventurers Guild or diggers. Rorin realizes that this is not rosy at all. He asks if he can scrape off this wall. The light is weak, but it is suitable as a light source. Besides, it is a whole object for research. The guy says that there are pieces lying on the ground. The girl notices this and rejoices, saying that this is a great piece. The main character stands behind the girl who picks up this piece. The guy says that if these are the ruins of an ancient civilization, then they were not in the best position. Lapis wonders why this is. She says that the ancient ruins can be described in one word, contradictory. The guy asks her in what sense. He asks if she can stand, to which the girl gives a negative answer. The guy drags the girl on his back again. She says that, as Rorin said, the ruins are fraught with danger, but at the same time there are absolutely ordinary places. Rorin says that of all the famous ruins, the most amazing place is the toilet. The guy talks about sewage treatment and odor elimination at altitude, and no guards and traps. He asks the girl if it's funny. Lapis asks if, while a person is in the process, it is not normal to think about protection. The guy says he didn't think about it. Lapis argues that, in this case, the ruins are not completely dangerous. Rather, there are fewer dangerous places here. The main character looks around and asks Lapis about what kind of ruins it is in the end. A guy with a serious face hopes that they are not dangerous. He will be on his guard, and the girl should not lower her vigilance. Lapis will try to detect magic and traps, but asks to take care of enemies if they appear. Rorin points his finger at the sword behind his back and claims that this is exactly what it is designed for. In the worst case, they would return through the hole in the goblin cave, It would be better to avoid encounters and choose to go to the surface. The girl does not believe that everything can go so well. Suddenly, the main character heard something. The guy abruptly grabs his sword, which causes Lapis on his back to scream. She says that he scared her. She addresses him by name. The guy asks her to be quiet because he noticed that someone was approaching. The main character stands holding his sword and looks forward. The girl says she can use magic to stop them, asks the guy to give a signal. They're looking at the turn. Rorin and Lapis are looking ahead. Someone's voice says that there is some creepy brother with a girl on his back. One person asks where they come from in these unexplored ruins, whether this could be an illusion. Someone says that they are here. It would be an illusion. It would be easier for him. Someone says that they are kind of like people, at least the heat comes from the bodies. A man with a beard holds his chin and says that this is not the best place to get lost. There is a group of 4 people, 2 guys, a girl, and an old man. Behind the girl's back is a bow. An old man holds a staff. The main character pays attention to their tokens. He is surprised that they are silver and realizes that they are silver rank adventurers. One of the guys smiles and asks them if they escaped from the goblins and hid in the ruins. He says they're not very lucky. All 4 of them approach Lapis and Rorin. The guy with the sword on his back is interested in the fact that the group came to an end, but they survived, says that they were more likely lucky here. The guy holds his head and turns away. The girl next to him says Chuck is unhappy. She pulls his ear, which makes him scream. Chuck tells her that he is in pain and asks her not to pull in case she tears him off. Nim says that if you don't listen, then you don't need ears. Chuck is a silver rank adventurer thief. He holds his ear. Nim is an archer adventurer of the silver rank. Ritz, the guy with the sword, is a swordsman, an adventurer of the silver rank. And the old man's name is Colts. He's also a silver-ranked adventurer magician. The main character looks at her in surprise, noticing her pointed ears. Colts asks the guy if this is his first time meeting an elf. Rorin apologizes and says that this is really the first time he's been rude. Colts says that of course they will look at her, because she is very beautiful. Nim says he'd better keep quiet if he doesn't want to lose his eyes. The old man says that even though he is old, he would not want to lose his eyes. Nim tells him not to worry, because this time she will manage with one eye. Ritz asks them not to behave like that, because they cause a lot of problems. Ritz stands next to him and says that they realized what position they were in. They would have held them before leaving, but they have a job now. Nim asks if they have heard anything about exploring the ruins near the village of Ain. The main character remembers Nalan's words, that you cannot take this request, but accept a better task there. Rorin understands that this is about him. In general, they found themselves in newly discovered ruins. Chuck says that ruins can sometimes be dangerous, but most often you can earn money. The guy stamps his foot and says that they tried to immediately pick up this task, but competitors also entered the business. Colt says they are now up against the group whose research will be more useful. Depending on this, they will get more or less, so they are in a hurry. The main character with Lapis on the wall assures them that they are not going to interfere with their work. Rorin asks them to just tell them which way the exit is, then they will go on by themselves. Ritz says they're actually on their own about this. The main character says fearfully that he was unlucky. Ritz asks the guy not to misunderstand them. They did not forget to write down the route. Rorin wonders if he looked like he thought they'd screwed up. Suddenly, Ritz, with a serious face, turns his attention to Lapis, who is on the back of the main character. Rorin turns to her. Lapis is sitting with a displeased face. The main character addresses the girl by name and says that it's rude to stare like that. Ritz said that he had never heard of anyone being paralyzed from fear, but that's not how someone who has to be dragged by a friend should look. Lapis buries her face in the guy's shoulder. Rorin asks a group of adventurers why they can't find their way back. Ritz grabs his forehead and tells them that they fell into a hole. The guy remembers how he kicked Chuck, who was hiding behind the smiling Colts. He talks about how Chuck somehow missed the trap. Ritz, with a serious face, claims that they were very lucky that there were no poison blades below, except that the height was not at the level of one floor. Chuck says that if there had been anyone at the top, they would have been pulled out, but they all failed. Nim tells Chuck that she will never forgive him for falling right on top of her. Chuck replies that there is no difference what to fall on her or on the floor. Everyone stared at the girl. Everyone examines her body, after which the girl takes up the bow and glares at the guy, telling him that if he has a last wish, then let him say it. A girl with a furious face points a bow towards the guy with words that he needs to be punished. The guy turns away in fear and screams that he lied. Nim pulls the bowstring with an arrow. Ritz says that, in general, they thought about a lot of things, but they never found a way to get to the exit from here. The main character replies that he understands everything. Ritz talks about what they got, but they had potions with them, so they somehow managed, so he would like to ask something. Lapis looks at the guy and tells him that she has only one healing left. The main character is surprised by this. Ritz is standing with a shield in his hands. It's just one thing, but it's much more effective than potions, so if she waits, she can heal someone again. The guy stands in disbelief. Lapis looks at Rorin and informs him that instead of wasting potions, they want her to go with them. The main character understands what's going on. Rorin thinks that they can get rid of him by taking only Lapis with them. The girl says she can't move, so she needs someone to wear it. If someone from the group wears it, the combat power will decrease, and Rorin can also defend himself. The girl tells the main character that even if they decide to quit, they won't even notice. Ritz hears everything with displeasure. He asks them if it looks like they can do this. Lapis and Rorin wonder if that's not the case. Ritz closes his eyes and says that they really look like villains, so there's nothing to object. Nim is holding Chuck by the scruff of the neck, with arrows sticking out of him. She says that if someone says that they will only take the girl and leave the man, then she will kill him herself. Ritz says that if something happens, then let the young lady use healing magic at their request. In exchange, Ritz offers them to join their group until they leave the ruins. Lapis informs them that it is accepted and they rely on them. Ritz looks at the smiling protagonist. Ritz stretches out his hand to the main character with a smile and says that they have agreed. He relies on them until he leaves the ruins. The main character agrees with him and shakes his hand. The whole group is looking at them. Someone says that they will continue the search now. Rorin realizes that he would like nothing to happen in the end and they could get out safely. However, the main character does not quite believe in this. Together, they head down the corridor. After a while, Lapis asks Rorin if his shoulder is okay. The girl said that the shoulder was healed with a potion, but if it gets worse, he should tell her. Rorin thought that she had only one divine spell left. That is, she had deceived others. In any case, until they get out, they share the same fate with the silver rank group. One of the group members said that these ruins are quite strange. As far as he knows, in the explored ruins of an ancient civilization, golems and undead come across among the enemies. That is, all inanimate, but there is no one here. Rorin said it was easier for them. The man said that there are only goblins here. Lapis thought that maybe they had penetrated from the outside, and there were other cracks through which they had crawled. The man replied that the entrance was sealed and there should be a defender here, but there was no one. The comrade replied that a lot of time had passed and they could have died. Rorin said it was important for them to go upstairs now. Suddenly, goblins appear. The archer girl is going to cover Rorin and Lapis. There were only 7 goblins. The guys didn't even need magical support. The group quickly deals with the goblins. The leader of the group gave Rorin the ears of the slain goblins for his task. A comrade says that the leader of the Ritz is a miser, but decided to help his less experienced comrades. Then Rorin had already scored a lot. Lapis starts to sigh, because she really doesn't like this smell. Suddenly, the archer Nim stops everyone and says that the smell in the air has changed, and smells of blood. Ritz asks if Lapis can go, but the girl has not recovered yet. Rorin wants to stand up for Lapis, but they are interrupted by a young man. They see the armor of a once-living adventurer. The magician tries to remember the competitors and whether there was anyone in leather armor. Nim turns to Rorin to get his opinion. The man says that, judging by the amount of blood, the owner was torn apart right here. Nim says that the armor belongs to their competitor, and she was a woman. Lapis says that there were only goblins in these ruins. If the owner of the armor was a woman, and she was killed by goblins, then this is unusual, because goblins do not behave like that. Nim agrees with Lapis and says that there was something else in these ruins. Lapis continues and says that only goblins appeared in these ruins. Goblins don't kill women, but if we assume that the armor belonged to a woman and she was killed, then something is wrong with these goblins. If the victim is still breathing, they will decide to take her to the nest. There's someone here besides the goblins. Nim asks Rorin about the hole they went through. Nim turns to Ritz and says that something is strange here and they need to get to the surface and regroup. Ritz doesn't want to come back. They decide to find at least tokens before returning. Ritz says that if they find competitors' tokens, then that's another conversation. They decide to move on. Lapis decides to walk on his own 2 feet. Ritz asks Rorin about his relationship with Lapis, but the man is confused. Ritz invites the guys to join the fight and inspect the rear. Lapis snuggles up to Rorin and says she's scared. Rorin is embarrassed. He suggests Lapis be careful. Lapis then asks Nim about their purpose. Nim says they're exploring the ruins, and they're also trying to find competitors. Lapis suggests going back to the pit they fell through. The girl assumed that the pit was a trap for intruders. Lapis suggests why they made this trap. Ritz asks about the pit. Lapis says that there should be a passage to service the trap, and suddenly there is a passage to the top. The group decides to go back, according to the previously drawn map. Finally, they arrived at the place. The ceiling was quite high, and the pit closes like a lid. Rorin thought that there was nothing inconspicuous. Chuck thought that he was a silver-ranked thief, but he couldn't find a way through. Suddenly, Lapis pressed a button and found a passage. The girl said that it is difficult to notice her among the mana materials, but there is a control panel here. Suddenly, a ladder appears. The guys decide to go upstairs, but Rorin has a bad feeling. Chuck grabbed the ladder and squeezed the wooden steps several times. They examined everything carefully. Nim approached him and asked with interest what was there. Chuck smiled broadly and said that there was a solid ladder they could climb. He will climb first. If he's up there meeting a monster, he might not fall off. Nim replied that it was the right judgment. Nim excitedly shouted that she was on her last journey. He has to fight there. Chuck started to climb in, but after the archer's words, he turned and looked at her with displeasure. He asked her if she was confusing anything. Rorin looked at them and said that somehow it was useless for them to succeed. Lapis awkwardly replied that if they had found a way back and climbed up, they would not have met. The girl looked at Chuck and added that they were lucky here. The man began to climb carefully to the top. He reached the top and tensely climbed to the floor. He looked around and saw nothing. Chuck shouted to his friends to come up one at a time. "It's okay, there's no one here." The man asked what would come up. Lapis replied with a smile that they could wait. Rorin watched as everyone climbed to the top. He felt a happy Lapis next to him and said that he shouldn't be too happy yet. The girl smiled broadly. Rorin asked tensely when they would get up, they would most likely be told to return. Wasn't he right? Lapis stared in front of her in shock. She hadn't thought about it at all. The guy went on to say that they were climbing to the level from which Ritz and the others had fallen, which meant they knew how to get out. Lapis asked tensely what to do. She did not foresee this. Lapis added that this is such an opportunity to explore the ruins, but for this, you need to climb. Most likely, there is really nothing at this level. Rorin looked at her and thought that he would like to leave these dangerous ruins right away. Rorin thought that, however. The guy looked at the upset girl and then closed his eyes. He approached her and asked what they had to offer. Lapis replied that besides divine spells, it was a difficult question. The girl said that if she said that she could use magic, it would be quite suspicious. Rorin asked if there might be some knowledge or skills. Lapis replied that if she could imagine what kind of place it was, she could make an approximate map. He asked how she would do it. Lapis asked that he knew that all the guild buildings, wherever he went, were almost completely the same. Of course, there are differences in what the workers bring, but in general, the guilds are unified. The girl smiled broadly and said loudly that the same applies to the ruins. She held up her hand to show how excited she was right now. Lapis said that the people of the ancient civilization did everything for certain purposes, and for the most part built the same type of buildings. The guy asked that there are exceptions. She replied that they were dating. The girl said that quite unusual ruins were being sold. Ritz grabbed the top steps and said wearily that he had finally climbed. Suddenly, Chuck jumped down from above. The man asked in surprise what Chuck was doing. He landed on the ground and shouted loudly that it was bad. They have to jump off urgently. The guy was very scared. Monsters began to appear from the dark corridor on the upper floor. They screamed and screamed furiously. Chuck shouted furiously that the goblins were attacking. He had to run. The goblins reached the stairs, but did not even use them. They quickly began to jump down one by one. The first monsters that appeared on the lower floor rushed at people. Rorin looked at the monsters in shock and shouted loudly what it was. Lapis didn't answer him, but just grabbed him, and they ran away together. Nim screamed loudly that it was ruins. Why are there so many goblins here? Where have they been hiding all this time? Chuck shouted that he didn't know. They suddenly jumped out. He doesn't want to be killed by goblins. Rorin thought with displeasure that they had got into trouble again. Still such a quantity. One wrong turn, if they get lost, they will be immediately covered by this crowd of goblins. The guy pushed off the ground and ran with the idea that then they would be finished. He whispered that it was somehow unfair. Lapis and Colt looked very tired already. The old man stopped and began to breathe quickly. He said he couldn't do it anymore. Lapis slowed down and said that her strength was also running out. She is very tired. Nim looked at them in fright and shouted loudly for Colts and Lapis not to stop. Chuck shouted furiously at them to hold on. They need to keep running. They shouted loudly that if they stopped, they would die. Rorin thought tensely that they had no strength left. Lapis didn't recover enough mana for a long run. The guy stared at the girl's back. He heard her say that he could leave her anyway. Rorin noticed that she was breathing harder. Rorin clicked his tongue in displeasure. He has already decided what to do, but he doesn't really like it. The guy approached Lapis and Colt, who looked at him excitedly. Rorin grabbed the old man and the girl. He quickly ran forward with them. Colt asked in surprise what had happened. Lapis shouted in surprise what he was doing now. Chuck asked if he was okay. Rorin replied that he was already used to it. Dragging a wounded comrade is a common thing for a mercenary. However, he had not slept properly for several days. Rorin thought tensely that it was hard for him. Colt regretfully said that he was asking for forgiveness, but he would definitely thank him. Lapis sadly said that she had caused him problems again. Rorin replied loudly that it was okay. Instead of working with their feet, they could work with their heads. Lapis lifted her head and looked at the tense guy. The guy ran ahead and told them that otherwise he would get tired too, and they would catch up. They can help with their brains. Rorin couldn't let them get caught, so he ran as hard as he could. Lapis asked the old man what mass murder with a fireball could do. He replied that it was a drop in the ocean, too many goblins. The girl said that she was stopped by a stone wall. Colt replied that he could have blocked the entire passage with a wall, but there were too many of them. The group looked at them hopefully. They are sure that the couple will be able to find a way out. Lapis asked what about the fireball. Colt replied that only twice. She thought that would be enough. Lapis replied that she did not. Lapis said that Colt is a skilled magician. The old man replied that Mrs. Lapis was also a visionary in magic. Rorin shouted at them to stop talking in vain. He thought he had to find some way. Lapis and Colt discussed various ways, but they looked more scared by the minute. Rorin asked tensely what they had done. The guy excitedly asked that they had come up with something. Colt lowered his head and said nothing. Lapis covered her face with her hands and said that it was nothing. The girl took her hands away and said that they had neither the strength nor the means to fight against all the goblins. There are too many of them to handle all of them. Chuck screamed that they would all be eaten. Lapis said that they would use her and Lord Nim for reproduction. Colt replied that it was really unknown. A woman from another group was most likely killed and eaten. Ritz shouted furiously at them to behave at least a little, according to the situation. He asked loudly what they could do. Nim didn't look good at the time. She gasped that she was ill. She won't be able to soon. Rorin looked at her, startled. Ritz also looked in her direction. He looked very worried. Chuck ran next to her and confidently shouted that he could carry her. Nim lowered her head in surprise and looked in front of her. She hadn't expected such an offer because everyone was already tired. Chuck said that they would gain at least some time. Nim said wearily that she was asking for forgiveness. If it got really bad, she would rely on him. This is really not good anymore. Rorin thought tensely that there was some way out of this at all. Most likely on that staircase. There is no solution. The forces are also running out. It is unknown when everyone will start to lose touch with reality. He continued to reason that if they just ran, they would most likely die, and there was no way to be sure. It's better than doing nothing. Rorin said he had a suggestion for them. He asked Ritz if he remembered the road they were running along. The man excitedly replied that he was not. Chuck should have remembered. The man in question looked at him in surprise. Rorin asked what it meant that they would be able to return to the hatch through which the goblins were pouring. Chuck shouted that he would have to go around the other aisles the wrong way, but what was he going to do there? Rorin replied that so many goblins had fallen, so there shouldn't be any left. They just jumped down in a crowd, but they won't be able to climb up like that. They'll have to use the stairs. The guy added that they wouldn't crush them in numbers that way. Chuck said they weren't that stupid after all. They will not wait for them to rise. If they get pinched, they're finished. Rorin asked the old man that he could use magic and buy some time. The Colts replied that it would buy time if he burned out the first firestorm and stopped it with a stone wall. Rorin replied with a smile that it was fine, then he could rely on him. Nim and the others ran forward to help. Ritz shouted that it was unlikely to stop them. Rorin said that until the wall collapses, they will go up. If they don't make it, he came up with the plan, then he will serve as their shield. He will protect them from the goblins. Shocked, Ritz asked what he was seriously saying, what he alone would do against such a crowd. Rorin replied that there would be a firestorm and a wall. He doesn't think that there will be so many opponents at once. Rorin added with a smile that to prevent this from happening, they should get up quickly. Chuck and Nim ran forward, and Ritz gritted his teeth in displeasure, but followed them. Ritz shouted loudly at Chuck to lead them to that hole. Chuck confidently replied that he understood. The man quickly turned the corner and said loudly that they needed to come here. Rorin told Colts to get ready to use magic. The old man confidently replied that it was fine. Rorin said when they get there, Chuck will be the first to climb up and then the support. Ritz said loudly that he was the leader of the group and he would protect them. Rorin replied that he was pleased to hear that, of course, but he would do it. He asked in surprise why. Rorin replied that he was too slow with his things. While he was climbing, the goblins would grab him, and with support from above, they would jump in at once. An adventurer is a new profession for him, but he used to be a mercenary. Ritz complained that this was a failure. He's counting on him. Chuck noticed the stairs and shouted loudly that they had arrived. Goblins are no longer raining down from above. Ritz stopped and shouted to his friends that it was great. They have to climb up. He looked back and shouted loudly that they were being overtaken. Now it's the Colts' turn to use magic. The old man grabbed his staff and closed his eyes. He said loudly that there was a raging whirlpool of fire in front of his eyes. He began to summon magic to make the blow very strong. The Colts furiously shouted that let the firestorm appear. He waved his staff with all his might, and the entire floor was filled with fire. He headed towards the crowd of goblins. The old man sternly told Rorin to move on. The man looked shocked at the fire that the Colts had created. The old man grabbed a staff and spoke so that a wall of earth would block the way for the goblins. He shouted loudly for the stone wall to be here and now. He created it and began to hold back the monsters. The group ran up to the stairs. Rorin screamed that they needed to get up now. Rorin thought excitedly that this was what a silver-rank mage meant. Suddenly, they began to hit the wall with great force. The guy shouted in shock, "What is it?" Ritz shouted, "What is it? They're definitely not normal." Rorin replied that even if the magic worked just fine, but what a flame it was. It should still be hot outside the wall. He shouted loudly that they were not very smart, but he had never heard of goblins chasing their prey so zealously. Rorin shouted that he would think about it later, and now he had to go upstairs. Small cracks began to appear on the wall, which were getting bigger and bigger by the second. Suddenly, a huge hole was formed in the wall, through which the goblins crawled. Rorin grabbed his sword and slashed at the goblin with all his might. The guy looked at him furiously. He destroyed the monster, but he was definitely not the last one. The guy wasn't going to give up. The next monster jumped with a loud scream. He was going to bite the guy, but Rorin managed to hit him with his sword. The guy skillfully swung his weapon to defeat all the monsters. Ritz followed the old man up the stairs, but he climbed too slowly. The man shouted irritably that he could move faster. The old man replied that he was trying. The last man climbed up the ladder and went to the top. Rorin looked at the top, which was still empty. He looked at the goblin remains on the ground. Rorin thought tensely that it looked like he could not do without a fight, but he had to cope with everything. At this time, the group continued to climb to the top. Finally, the first member of the team got in. Chuck sat down on the floor on the next floor. He lowered his head wearily and breathed loudly. He couldn't give up at a time like this. The guy looked around and excitedly thought that there were no enemies. He turned to the stairs and lowered his hand. He shouted loudly for Nim to grab him. The archer looked at him and then grabbed his arm tightly. Chuck helped her up. He said it was just fine. The archer sat down on the ground and breathed wearily. She coped but spent a lot of effort. It's good that the guy helped her. The girl looked at Chuck and said that she was very grateful to him. Chuck told her not to worry. He looked at Lapis and said that the next young lady, she should move faster. Nim heard a strange noise and looked down the dark corridor. She said fearfully that it couldn't be. They're here too. Rorin was fighting other monsters at the time. Rorin stabbed the monster with his sword. The other monsters began to approach too, but he also dealt with them. He asked how much more time they needed. He was already at the limit. The old man was helped to climb to the top floor. Lapis screamed loudly that there was still a little bit left. They tried their best so that Rorin could do his part of the plan. The archer turned her head and shouted in shock for Chuck to look there. The man helped the old man and did what the girl asked. He wants to understand what happened. Chuck shouted that this was bad luck. There were even more of these creeping monsters here. The man looks very worried. He grabbed his sword and stared at the girl. He shouted to the princess to look after the Ritz. He asked the old man how much was left. He replied that he only had the strength left for one time. Chuck looked down and shouted furiously that now they needed to buy time until Ritz and the guy got here. The goblins were looking at the people from the dark part of the corridor. Rorin destroyed another monster. He thought angrily that he was killing one and another was taking his place. There was no end to them. We need to make sure he doesn't trip over their bodies. Suddenly, he stopped and stared intently in front of him. He came forward and thought that something was wrong here. The guy started looking around quickly to figure out what was going on. He thought it was his imagination, or the number of corpses on the floor was too small. It can't be that he didn't kill as many as he thought. It's very strange. He recalled the number of goblins and thought that besides, when they came running from the top floor, some of them were trampled by their own comrades, so there must be more dead people on the floor. He took a few steps and thought that after all, when they came here, there wasn't a single body here, but why did it happen? Rorin couldn't understand how this was possible. He noticed how the goblin walked up to his comrade's body and grabbed him. The other goblins began to approach the guy, but he was already waiting for them. He was going to fight to the end. Rorin hit the goblin, and it flew into the wall. A couple of monsters were stopped, and one of them walked up to the monster's body and grabbed it. Rorin was shocked to think what was going on. He looked at the hole in the wall that the monsters had entered. Startled, Rorin thought that they were collecting bodies, but why would they do that? He shouted to Chuck that everything was bad. Lapis called Rorin. He excitedly asked that everyone had gone upstairs. She screamed hysterically that yes, but there are monsters here too. They couldn't get rid of them in any way. The girl looked at him and screamed that they were most likely goblins with special features. Everyone is trying to fight them off, but they won't last long. You need to come up with something. She shouted that at this rate they would be surrounded from two sides. Rorin furiously said that there were also goblins, which they liked so much about these ruins. He thought he should take it up to the top. The man got into a fighting position and got ready. He flexed all his muscles to attack. Rorin paused for a few seconds to aim. He was going to destroy all the goblins. He glared at the mob of goblins. Rorin stabbed them with all his might with his sword. Monsters fell to the ground with loud screams. The guy finally began to cope with everything. The monsters screamed, but were temporarily eliminated. Lapis looked down excitedly. Rion ran to the stairs with the thought that this was his chance. He had to take it. Rorin climbed up a few steps and began to chop off the bottom ones. He tried his best to keep the goblins from climbing to the top. The monsters growled in displeasure. He climbed to the top, and Lapis shouted that he was here. He asked what the situation was. The girl shouted that Chuck was injured. Ritz is doing his best, but things are not going well. The couple looked at her and screamed in fright for her to be careful. Rorin thought she was going to be attacked by a black golem. The archer stabbed the monster with a dagger. The monster didn't even grimace after being wounded. Nim thought, startled, that he hadn't even flinched. She couldn't believe that he was as strong as that was possible. The black goblin grabbed her by the jacket and pulled her towards him. She screamed hysterically that she shouldn't. Rorin ran up to the goblin and kicked him in the face to get him off the girl. His head turned unnaturally, but he didn't react to it in any way. Rorin thought that this blow would have blown off an ordinary goblin's head, but why did this one remain intact? Rorin gripped his sword tightly and thought, okay. He hit the monster's head again with all his might. The guy looked at him furiously. He wasn't going to give up so easily. His sword just couldn't pierce him. Rorin thought that his skin was very tough and durable. The goblin tilted his head towards the girl, and she stuck a dagger in his eye. The monster grabbed his head and screamed loudly. Lapis ran up to them and grabbed her. Rorin thought that obviously his eyes weren't that hard. He stabbed him in the neck with his sword. Rorin shouted angrily that one attack would not stop him. He'll just keep hitting him until it's enough. He beat him until he finally destroyed him. Lapis pointed at Ritz and screamed that he was attacked by another black goblin. Rorin turned and saw the man trying to fight him off. He must help him urgently. Rita screamed furiously for the monster to let him go. Rorin shouted for the old man to do something. He fiercely replied that he had used all his spells on the other. He can't use the most basic spells right now. Rorin shouted furiously that he would help now. He hit the goblin's neck with all his might. The monster let go of Ritz, who grabbed his sword and hit him on the head. Rorin and Ritz surrounded the black goblin and simultaneously struck at the neck. The black goblin couldn't survive it, and the guys finally got rid of him. The group didn't get much rest. The old man said that these black goblins appeared out of nowhere. When the arrows failed to pierce them, Chuck went ahead to protect them. Nim cut Chuck's head and excitedly said that she was asking for forgiveness. It was because of her that he was injured. He told her to stop. She was too soft. It wasn't like her. She can repay him for everything later. Rorin approached Lapis and asked if she had found anything. The girl examined the goblin's body and said that she could speculate about some things, but these were just guesses. She said it looked like they had stumbled upon a very problematic ruin. Rorin asked what problematic ruins meant. He didn't understand what she was talking about. Lapis walked up to Ritz and said loudly that there was something she wanted to clarify with him. The man clutched his head in pain and stared at her. She asked if there was any reason they had to go with them. He replied that he did not. Lapis said that, however, it somehow coincides with their goal of exploring the ruins, but it would be bad if they didn't find a place to rest soon. Ritz looked at Rorin intently. He went up to him and told him that anyway, they needed to get out of here. If they stay here any longer, they will fall into another ambush. Ritz replied that, yes, it would be terrible to be attacked by one of the black goblins again soon. Polis asked Chuck that she should use some kind of spell. The guy replied that no, he just felt a little dizzy. Pilus said it was a pretty serious injury. He needed to be examined by a doctor. He replied that he would take it into consideration. Chuck added that he would follow her advice when they returned, safe and sound. Ritz excitedly asked what he could move. The guy shouted furiously at him not to talk nonsense. Chuck shouted that if he wanted him to move, he had to give the order. Nim told him not to force himself. The guy tapped her on the shoulder and said that he had already said that he was fine. Chuck smiled broadly and looked at her. He said loudly that he just lost consciousness for a couple of seconds, that's all. He can move, so she can stop worrying. The old man said wearily that he was probably the biggest problem here. He lost all his spells. He will be useless. Chuck said he was a fool. No one blames him for that. Ritz said with a smile that it was only thanks to him that they were able to defeat that monster, so there's nothing they can do, and now they can move on. They are already very tired. Rorin and Lapis walked in front of the whole group. Ritz was helping Chuck walk, so they walked at the very end. Nim was constantly watching Chuck to make sure he was okay. Rorin thought that from the way Lapis was acting, she knew the structure of these ruins. He asked what happened to the guys they were fighting with. It can be said that this is the highest class of goblins. Lapis replied that they looked more like goblins, although she thinks they were ordinary goblins until they grew to this size. If that were the case, then this body is too abnormal. She asked that he hadn't noticed anything when he was fighting them. Rorin replied that the goblins were picking up the bodies of fallen goblins. He doesn't think they collected them as food. Rorin asked if the goblins weren't acting strangely in these ruins. Lapis replied that he had caught something. It was definitely not normal behavior for goblins. He said that the only inhabitants of these ruins are probably goblins. The girl excitedly asked what he had just said. She wants to understand him. She asked with interest that he might be familiar with alchemy or pharmacy. Rorin replied that he had only heard of them, but he did not know anyone who understood them. Lapis said that then he would know on which creatures such people would test their inventions. He asked her what she meant by mice, those that are used for drug testing. The girl asked if he knew why he was using mice to follow. He asked how a mercenary could know such a thing. She replied that even if he knew, it was useless knowledge. Lapis said that they use mice because they have a short life cycle. Because they grow quickly and reproduce in large numbers, they are ideal test subjects. Rorin said that life expectancy is short. They grow quickly and reproduce in large quantities. Lapis said that now he should think about what else fits this description. The guy looked at her in shock and tensely asked what goblins they were. Lapis turned and smiled. She realized that Rorin had taken her hint and now they could figure it out. Lapis said it was right. If her guesses are correct, and perhaps this place is a research center, namely the Goblin Research Center. Lapis said that they reproduce quickly and therefore are profitable in the form of experimental subjects. Although they don't look like humans, their anatomy is similar. Is there an even more suitable creature for the role of a laboratory rat? Rorin asked what she was saying. Lapis replied that they would eat almost anything, from leftovers to dead bodies. According to the records, it was a good way to dispose of garbage. In some books, it was written that in this way they reduced about 80% of the waste accumulated by people. The guy hesitantly said that it sounds profitable, he thinks. Lapis said that besides, no matter how many goblins there were, these people would consider them nothing more than just expendable. She added that in addition to increasing the population of ordinary goblins, Doesn't it look like they are breeding certain types of goblins in addition? Rorin thought that certain species, such as those recently. The girl said, that's why there are so many goblins in these ruins. Suddenly, she stopped when the couple came around the corner. She saw the danger that threatened them. Two goblins jumped out of their hiding place and ran towards Lapis. Rorin looked at them in fright and grabbed his sword. The girl calmly waved her hand. She quickly dealt with the monsters with her power. The girl looked at their bodies on the floor and said loudly that besides, this center is not just a place for reproduction. Lapis dusted off her hands, and the guy looked at her awkwardly. He asked that she was strong. The girl took it away, which, perhaps, returning to the conversation, this place has another purpose besides reproduction. She said it was likely that goblin enhancement and evolution were also the goal of the study. Rorin asked what was serious. Lapis said that in simple words, it is a center aimed at strengthening all kinds of goblins. Lapis said that it didn't seem strange to him that they hadn't seen anything that didn't look like goblins. Perhaps it's because they can't stay in the goblin stage anymore. They were trying to strengthen the goblins themselves. Rorin asked if they would be alright if they got bigger. Lapis said that even if they grow up, in the end they will remain goblins. The guy asked that they escaped through a crack in the wall, but once they met a magical type of goblins. Lapis replied that most likely their changes were limited to the limits of these ruins. The girl loudly continued to say that their evolution was the result of hiding in these ruins. Anyway, that's the type of research in this place. Lapis said that she thought they were hibernating, but for some reason, their peace was disturbed. She doesn't think that the removed seal at the entrance was the catalyst that awakened these ruins. Rorin asked if it would be worse if they left it as it was. Lapis replied that this black goblin was an advanced type of goblin. This something was created inside these ruins, but the main problem is its behavior. These goblins don't need seed carriers. She said that there was most likely a breeding center somewhere in the ruins where goblins could be produced without much trouble. Since they don't need seed carriers, that's why they kill female adventurers. Still, the goblin who attacked her tried to rip off her clothes. Rorin stared at her in shock. Lapis said he understood now. Even though they don't need it, they still attack women. They have another reason to attack women, and it's not for procreation. She went on to say that if you look closely, you can find traces that some human parts were mixed with them. It is even possible that these parts may belong to the previous team. Rorin asked her if she still called it goblins. Lapis said that at least it is possible to call a goblin born of a human mother half goblins. They are still goblins. The girl said that this would turn into a big problem. This center aims to strengthen and improve the physiology of goblins, and goblins born here begin to acquire human characteristics. Lapis said that Rorin said that goblins collect the bodies of their dead relatives. She thinks it's because they can reuse body parts to create new goblins. She added that if they repeated this process over and over again, what would happen if the goblins progressed enough to be able to withstand a dragon attack? Rorin looked at her and asked how they could return these ruins to their original state. She replied that she hadn't looked that far yet. The guy thought that if she knew how to close this place, it would be much easier. Lapis said with displeasure that there was no guarantee that all the ruins were the same. I mean, she just wanted to say that there is no reliable way to close this place. It's not because she hasn't explored this place enough. The girl pointed at Rorin and screamed that the fact that he had everything written on his face was his weakness. The guy thought confusedly what kind of expression he had just made. He asked where they were going now. Lapis replied that she was looking for a private room that she could use earlier. There must have been a caretaker in this place. She hopes there will be some records or other documents. He asked that people really lived in such a place. The girl replied that since teleportation magic existed at that time, a very large amount of mana was required to move to and from the city. She said that's why they would build living quarters here to make life easier. Rorin asked that they did so. Lapis said they should have, that's why there should be rooms for employees here. The girl excitedly shouted that she would use materials that could give them the key to how to close this place. If she finds something worthwhile, she will immediately take it up. Rorin said it was a very bold statement. Lapis said that the owner of these places has been dead for God knows how many hundreds of years, so this is not such a bold statement. Rorin asked if this place was inhabited. Doesn't that mean that people closed these ruins themselves? He asked if they wouldn't have packed all the most valuable things with them when they left him. Lapis replied that it was also true. Rorin asked what she would do then. The girl talked about what she would do. Rorin looked at the team and thought there was a chance they would be attacked by goblins again. Chuck is unlikely to be able to fight at full strength, and the Colts have also used up all their spells. Ritz and Nim seemed to be fine. The guy complained that he needed a new weapon. Lapis replied that it would most likely break after 2 or 3 attacks. This is a problem, but it will be almost impossible to get a new weapon now. Rorin said that he would think about it when he finally broke down. It's much more important to find information now. Lapis replied that it was absolutely true. By the way, they have already reached the living quarters. Lapis pushed open the door and shouted loudly that they were coming in now. Rorin looked at her in shock. He hadn't expected the girl to be so enthusiastic. Rorin shouted that it was okay, there could be traps. Lapis replied that she happened to know something about the ruins, so he can relax and leave the rest to her. Ritz looked at her and asked uncertainly what she was doing now. Rorin didn't answer. He doesn't really understand himself. Lapis began to scatter objects with a smile. The girl complained that everything was absolutely useless here. Lapis walked past the guys and said that she would go check the next room. Maybe she would find something there. Rorin awkwardly said that compared to them, she seemed to know what she was looking for. Nim said that this place was the home of an ancient kingdom. Ritz said that, in other words, everything here once belonged to someone from the kingdom. Ritz came over and asked if they could just take a piece of this item and get it over with. Their original task was to explore the ruins, so this is enough to prove it. He asked what was wrong. Lapis replied that she did not see any problems. It's always good to come home safe and sound. Ritz shouted in displeasure that, shouldn't they return with them? It doesn't look like anything will change in a day or two. The girl looked at the book and asked which rank was higher than the gold or magic silver rank. She said tensely, who knows how long it would take for someone to respond. Rorin thought that, from what he had heard, the gold adventurers number in the hundreds, magical silver ones number in the tens, but there are also crimson gold ones, and they are barely enough to last up to 10. Lapis waved her head and said that if they wanted to come back, she wouldn't stop them. She just wishes them a safe return. She looked around the room and said that there was no one here either. The girl went into the next one, and Rorin followed her. He said she was pretty harsh. Lapis opened the door and replied that it would be bad if they forced them to stay. She began to study the materials. Rorin looked at her and asked her what it meant. She had already decided that he would be with her. The girl stopped and excitedly said what it meant. Lapis looked at the guy and sheepishly asked that he would not stay with her. The girl did not even think that Rorin would want to leave. She felt that they needed to stick together. Rorin grinned and said with a smile that he thought it was too late for him to turn back. Lapis happily shouted that it was great. She doesn't think that her strength alone will be enough. The girl grabbed a new book and shouted joyfully that she was very grateful. Suddenly, she stopped and stared at an old book. She reached for it and picked it up. Lapis said with a smile that she had good news. Rorin asked what the news was. The girl replied that she had found notes that reveal the nature of these ruins. He definitely has a method of closing this place. The guy said he was surprised that she could read the text of the ancient kingdom. Lapis replied that she was, after all, a priestess of the god of knowledge. He asked that all the servants of knowledge are so knowledgeable. She replied that some of them were. Lapis put her hand on her chest and proudly shouted that, for example, she was. Rorin looked at her with displeasure and asked what was good, but what should they do next with these manuscripts? The girl pointed to the map and said that this place looked like a control room. If they can access the control panel, they can close these ruins. Ritz asked what it meant. They had already decided on their next goal. Lapis replied that fortunately yes, but what would they do? Ritz replied that they would go with them. Chuck came into the room and said he had a feeling that if they stayed with them, the chances of survival would increase. The girl asked with a smile that it was true. Rorin said they should hurry to the control room. He looked at the team and added that once there, they would put an end to this chaos once and for all. The guy walked up to the front desk and saw Ritz. He thought that this was the guy who had registered as an adventurer at the same time as him. Ri is a name he has heard various rumors about. He went on to argue that he didn't know anything about him other than his name. Apparently, he received a better rating for the order than he did from the same customer. He is actively engaged in certain and investigative orders. The guy looked at the back of the members of the Ritz team and thought that he saw that he had received the silver rank before him. He didn't want to accept it, but that's the way it is. He clenched his hand into a fist and thought tensely that this guy was his rival in life. His friend laughingly asked him what he thought of the Ritz again. The wizard said that he would just say that he wasn't worried about it. The guy thought that was why he was grateful for this turn of events. A girl came up to them and said that some ruins had recently been excavated near the city of Ain. In order to increase the effectiveness of research, they sent 2 groups of silver rank. The girl excitedly added that they would be rewarded according to their loot. The guy happily thought that this was a great opportunity to find out which one of them was better. Ritz approached them and said that he was the leader of this group, Rhea. He was glad to meet them. He held out his hand to the guy, who thought that this was a setback. He needed to stay calm. He needs to be given a decent answer. The girl from his team screamed that it couldn't be. This is really Rhea. She is very glad to finally meet him. The guy from his team said it was amazing, what a coincidence. The girl came up to them and excitedly asked what it meant that she must be him. She's really a charming elf. Chuck said with a laugh that she said she was charming. The guy approached the colt and said with a smile that he had heard many fairy tales about his magical power. The old man laughed proudly. He liked the compliment. Ritz asked tensely what was going on here. The knight from the other team replied that it was because of the stories about his adventures. Everyone had heard them. The girl said with a smile that their leader. She and her friend shouted loudly that one of his biggest fans. The man shouted in shock that they were saying this. He was not his fan. They have to stop. He shouted that he was just thinking about their similarities. The girl screamed that he had finally realized that they were alike. The guy complained that it was only when he came up with a cool nickname for himself that his terrible luck. Lapis loudly said that now that they had found the instructions for these ruins, they should move faster. If they can get into the control room, they can put an end to this chaos. The girl excitedly said that it says here that this manager is a very kind person. After all, there are no strange riddles or ciphers from strange items here. The team ran after Lapis. She stopped and told Rorin that if they were violent, there would be all sorts of strange things and riddles that would make him strangle them. He asked in surprise that she was serious. Rorin wondered intently what kind of ruins this man had been studying. He wants to ask, but he feels like he's going to get some kind of absurd answer, so he'll leave it alone. The girl shouted loudly that she had read it in a book. Rorin replied that it was clear. They ran forward. Lapis shouted in displeasure that she really read it in the book, of course. He awkwardly replied that, of course. Ritz looked at them and tensely asked that they would take her word for it so that she could focus on the task. The girl looked at the man in surprise. Ritz went on to say that it was unknown when those goblins would show up again. That's the problem. This time they accepted one terrible quest. Rorin replied that yes, he knew the feeling. Rorin thought it was supposed to be a simple exploration quest, but they ended up in dangerous ruins. Lapis said that they were specifically unlucky to get lost in these ruins. The guy asked in surprise that she was a mind reader. Lapis replied that his thoughts were written on his face. He has to be careful with that. She shouted that too. The girl added that the people competing with the Ritz were the most unlucky. Rorin said yes, he couldn't argue with that. She went to get the team. Lapis stopped and walked to the huge door. The girl said that it was great. She thinks she spent enough time on all this. They're finally here. The girl opened the book and carefully read the instructions for the mechanism. Lapis turned the parts and took her hand away. The door opened and she said they could go inside. Rorin excitedly said that it was impressive. The girl excitedly spoke so that he would save the compliments for later after she took care of it. The team came to a strange panel. Lapis said that it must be a control device. He has the ability to control various features of the ruins. The girl made a couple of taps to check the panel. Rorin excitedly asked her what she thought she could manage. The girl confidently replied that, of course, Chuck thought he couldn't see any other entrances or doors. Lapis smilingly told them to leave it to her. It's just as easy to manage. Suddenly, she screamed loudly what it was. She doesn't understand what the red inscription is. The girl excitedly said that for some reason it would only allow him to turn on the device and enter a stop command. She doesn't think she made a mistake. It's so weird. Rorin asked if she could explain the reason why it wasn't working. Lapis replied that it was possible that the device itself had broken down over time. If that's the case, then there's nothing she can do. Strange words began to appear on all the panels. Ritz shouted in shock that now these red inscriptions are everywhere. Rorin asked excitedly what was going on. Lapis replied that yes, this place was a research center with researchers. Rorin said it was pretty obvious from the name. The girl said that those researchers had probably registered at the center. Rorin asked what she meant. Suddenly, the doors abruptly began to open. Ritz shouted loudly that the doors suddenly began to open on both sides. Chuck screamed in fright what was going on. Lapis quickly began typing something on the panel. The girl said tensely that she had failed biometric authentication. The guy hesitantly asked what kind of biometric, what is it all about? She replied that this device only provides access to registered researchers. Those researchers aren't here anymore. but she touched it and turned it on to enter a stop command. The first set of red symbols was a warning that she had failed authentication. Lapis went on to say that she didn't pay attention to it and tried to dial the cancellation command. After failing for the third time, the system was blocked. She won't let him do anything anymore. Rorin asked what it meant. The girl nervously said that now she knows that there are intruders here. The facility's self-defense system was activated. The team looked at her in shock. Ritz shouted furiously that it was not good that they should do. Rorin asked with displeasure that he could express himself normally. His words don't make sense. Lapis said they were identified, and a trap was activated to eliminate them. The entrance is closed, and the artificial goblins will come running here. The goblins are already on their way here. She asked them to stop. Rorin grabbed his sword and shouted angrily that he thought they had no other choice. Lapis screamed that she was sorry for that. She will do everything she can to cheat the system. The girl began to quickly dial various combinations. She said that she had done this once before. The number of goblins in the area shouldn't be a problem. As long as she works, she will be completely defenseless. Ritz excitedly asked how she could be sure she could handle it. He didn't understand what she could do in such a situation. He looked at her intently. Lapis confidently shouted that it was because she was a follower of the god of knowledge. Rorin asked that she couldn't keep using that as an excuse. She knew that. The girl asked if she had ever lied. Rorin smiled and said that as far as he could remember, never. Then she can keep doing what she's doing. The guy grabbed his sword and tensely asked that in the meantime he would buy as much time as she needed. She is satisfied with this option. Lapis shouted that she was counting on him. Chuck shouted at the old man to stay close to the little lady. He's exhausted anyway, he is. Colt confusedly said yes, but he apologizes for it. Rorin looked at the sword and took a deep breath. Rorin looked forward intently to receive the monsters. Chuck, Ritz, and Nim stood next to each other and also got ready. They stared furiously at the passageways that had opened not too long ago. Nim, with the help of her excellent hearing, heard footsteps. She screamed loudly that here they were. Ritz screamed loudly that they had no choice. Well, at least the door is not so wide. The goblins began to run into the room, one by one. They were growling and shouting loudly. They showed their sharp teeth and headed towards the people to destroy them. Ritz told her to stay near the device and provide support with her bow. He asked Chuck if he could fight. He shouted that he would fight, but this is the most terrible situation. Ritz looked at Rorin and shouted loudly that he would leave this side to him. The guy confidently said that it was good. He'll be fine, you don't have to worry. The guys scattered in different directions. Rorin destroyed the goblins one by one. Chuck also fought monsters with his sword. Nim helped them with her bow. Ritz felt someone approaching from behind. He turned abruptly and thrust his shield forward. The guy was able to defend himself from the goblin's blow. Ritz broke the monster's weapon. Ritz saw a huge monster that was as tall as a room. The guy shouted loudly that they had a problem. A big guy appeared here. The monster looked at the people with a hideous smile. Rorin went to the goblin with the words that he would deal with him. The guy looked at him intently. He had to help Lapis buy time. He's sure she can handle it. The monster rushed at the guy. He extended a clawed hand forward to grab it. Rorin took up a fighting stance and gripped his sword tightly to ward off the blow. He struck his hand with the sword, and it so happened that he was able to chop it off. The goblin screamed loudly and screamed. Rorin stared at him in shock and hit the monster again. The guy stuck his sword into the monster's chest. The goblin tried to grab the guy's head with his only hand. Rorin was able to dodge and hit the goblin in the stomach. Rorin managed to defeat a healthy goblin, but it was very difficult. The guy looked at his sword and said that this sword would not last long. He needed a new one. Chuck shouted loudly that this was the problem. Rorin shouted loudly for Lapis to tell him how much more time she needed. He knew they wouldn't last long. The girl replied tensely that she had to finish as soon as she could. Even so, it opposes the technology of the ancient kingdom. She can't handle it in just a few minutes. She excitedly added that she didn't think it would take more than an hour. Nim said they wouldn't last that long. She's running out of arrows. Colt said he only had one spell left. Chuck hit the goblin, shouting that there was no end to them. He thought tensely that it seemed to him, or in fact, those creatures were stronger than those they had fought earlier. Rorin looked at the goblin, who was carrying off his dead comrades. He said that even now, they are trying to carry away their dead comrades from the battlefield. Lapis said that they are valuable resources at the end. She screamed that, wait a minute, they were taking the corpses. They better not be allowed to do this. Chuck shouted that if they had the chance. Ritz shouted that they were making every effort to repel the advancing enemies. Rorin asked why it was so important. Lapis replied that he didn't understand that they had discussed earlier how they were using the dead to create other goblins. They used their accumulated experience to create goblins stronger than the previous ones. She added that experience, which means data from the battle. All the combat experience that the goblins have accumulated. It will become a source of information for creating a stronger type. Lapis looked at the instructions and said that according to this manual, as long as there is a new body, transferring this experience to a new body takes only a few seconds. She went on to say that, in addition, this room is directly connected to the production facility. Rorin asked that the longer this goes on, the stronger the goblins become. Lapis replied that it seems that when they collect enough combat information from an ordinary goblin, then it is used to create a stronger goblin. She fired, but the arrow hit the log. She screamed in shock that the goblin had blocked the arrow with a shield. Chuck shouted that these creatures had definitely changed the way they used their weapons. Ritz shouted loudly, which was fast, before they created a stronger goblin. He already hates these disgusting goblins, but they have to cope. They looked at the door, from which there were loud footsteps. A huge goblin leg appeared, and then a large hand that holds an entire wooden club. Rorin looked at the advanced goblin and smiled fiercely. The guy shouted loudly that a stronger type had appeared. Their business is getting worse and worse by the minute. Rorin ran forward and found himself behind the goblin. He raised his sword and hit the monster with all his might, but it managed to turn around. He deflected the guy's blow with his club. Rorin glared at his sword, which had struck the goblin's club. He quickly put the gun away and got into a fighting position. The goblin headed for the man. The guy noticed that the goblin grabbed a baton and waved it. He quickly lowered his torso and managed to dodge. Rorin quickly ran back a few meters. Rorin thought furiously that this was a setback. This goblin is different from the others. He has thick skin, which makes it harder to attack him. The guy stared at him in shock. Rorin asked angrily that he was smiling now. The monster wiped his lips with his hand and stared at the guy. He didn't look scared or vulnerable. He liked fighting. The guy looked at the goblin's wide smile, which seemed to be laughing. Rorin thought uncertainly that it was mocking him because he was weak. Rorin grinned and headed for the goblin. The monster smiled and looked at the man in surprise. The guy shouted loudly that it was not necessary to evaluate him. He would destroy him. The guy jumped on the goblin and kicked him in the stomach. Rorin grabbed his sword and swung at the monster. The guy quickly began to strike one after the other. The goblins smiled and began to fend off the attacks. Suddenly, he realized that Rorin wasn't really weak. The guy seemed to go mad and began furiously hitting the goblin's baton. Suddenly, it cracked and began to crumble into small pieces. The monster put the baton in front of him and began to reflect new blows. Rorin managed to break it, and the monster screamed loudly. The club in his hands became just a rag after Rorin's fierce blows. The guy didn't stop for a second. He continued to strike at the monster. Rorin swung his sword so fast that it hit the other goblins who were standing nearby. He managed to destroy a huge crowd of goblins, but his main target was a mega monster. Rorin gripped his sword tightly and pointed it at the goblin. The monster screamed loudly when the guy stuck a sword into it. He was distraught with pain, but Rorin wasn't going to let him go that easily. Rorin hit the goblin one last time and screamed loudly. He continued to swing his sword and destroy the monsters. Chuck looked at him in shock and said what was going on. He added that the rumors about him were true. Nim screamed that it was not the time to let her guard down. They should start behaving like a silver rank adventurer. Even so, it's not good. Nim said that the sword would break soon. Ritz shouted what it was. The little lady had to hurry up. Lapis shouted that she knew, but still. The girl screamed that she had entered commands to disable the facility and stop the goblins. The last one remains. It refuses to accept the final command for the control unit. Ritz asked what she meant. Lapis shouted that the system refused to stop working. If the system had stopped working, the two commands it had entered earlier would have worked. Then the ruins and goblins would finally stop and start to fall apart. Ritz said that if he needed to stop everything, then couldn't she just destroy the device itself? Lapis screamed loudly that if he could, then please, he had to do it. The girl continued to shout that this system had survived for hundreds of years without any maintenance and still works without a single problem. But it should stop working if it destroys it. Ritz approached the system and told Lapis to step back. He raised his sword and hit the equipment with all his might. Suddenly, he raised the sword and looked at its remains. He shouted in shock that it was so difficult. Lapis shouted loudly that there was a magic spell protecting the coating. Surface attacks are not enough to destroy it. She screamed that it would be impossible to break it without some kind of magic sword. Rorin hit the monster one last time, and the sword in his hands just crumbled. Rorin looked at the floor and saw a large number of goblin bodies. He was able to deal with so many monsters, it's just incredible. The guy exhaled wearily. Lapis shouted that it would not stop just like that. Ritz asked that she couldn't just destroy the device itself. The guy shouted that if she could do it, she should do it. The guy looked at the open door and stared intently into the darkness. Rorin exhaled wearily and tried to catch his breath. He didn't take his eyes off the door. Rorin thought excitedly that there was a magic spell protecting the coating. The guy stared in front of him in shock. He couldn't believe that such a thing had happened. The guy shouted loudly for Lapis to get out of there. He took something out of his bag and threw it into the equipment with all the mud. The girl ran away and was shocked to think what it was. She looked at the object and thought it was a goblin magic amulet. The object shone brightly and exploded. Rorin hoped for such an outcome of events. He succeeded. Lapis walked up to the explosion site and excitedly thought that it was that goblin mage's item, the mana depletion necklace. She is very surprised that Rorin used this thing. Rorin thought tensely that it had been a long time since he had been used in the goblin lair. He should have saved up some mana in that case. The guy looked at the amulet that was stuck in the barrier. He shouted loudly for her to move away. The magic item shone and then broke through the magic field. The amulet fell on the equipment. The old man said in surprise that the protective barrier was gone. Rorin could hear loud footsteps coming from the hallway. He quickly picked up his sword. A crowd of various goblins entered the room, so there were the weakest monsters, but also the strongest. Chuck shouted furiously that more monsters had come. The guy threw his sword. A piece of the sword, which was left after the battle with the goblins, flew into the equipment. Rorin looked at the system intently. He waited anxiously for what would happen. The sword hit the equipment and broke it. There was a loud bang that could be heard by everyone in this room. He managed to make a huge crack in the system. Rorin looked at the broken machine and froze. He felt goblins running at him, but he didn't do anything. Suddenly, the monsters froze and began to make strange noises. The team looked at the goblins in shock, who froze, and some even fell to the floor like dolls. Ritz asked in surprise that they were just frozen now. Lapis took her hands off her ears and opened one eye. She thought it was finally over. She can still move. That's good. There probably wasn't much mana accumulated, so the range was less than last time. The girl looked at the broken device and thought that it looked like they had barely survived. She looked at Rorin and thought with a smile that it was just amazing to come up with such an idea in this situation, but the girl came up to the guy and screamed loudly that it was incredibly dangerous. She noticed that the guy began to sway from side to side. She excitedly asked what was wrong with him. Rorin just fell to the ground. The guy fell unconscious. He was very tired after fighting with so many monsters. Lapis screamed that she would help now. Nim took advantage of the moment and stepped aside. The girl remembered how she noticed a strange crystal that fell out of the defeated goblin. She walked over to the monster's body and took out a strange object. Lapis shouted for Ritz to help her. The man turned and saw that Lapis was trying to lift Rorin by the arms. He also saw that all the monitors began to rise, and then a passage appeared. Rorin opened his eyes and saw the blue sky. He didn't understand what had happened. Lapis looked at him and shouted joyfully that he had finally woken up, thank God. The guy noticed that the girl was sitting on his chest. He looked at her with displeasure and then hit her on the forehead. Rorin said she shouldn't climb men so recklessly. Lapis said there was nowhere else to sit. Rorin clutched his head and replied that even so, she could have sat in an empty seat on the bed. The girl complained that this bed was too hard. Its lower part was just falling off. Rorin ignored her words and asked that they were in the hospital now. Lapis replied that yes, they were in the hospital. He wants to know what happened after he lost consciousness. Okay, they can start by saying that he remembers the last one. He replied that he remembered up to the moment when he threw the longsword. The girl said it didn't look like he had problems with memory or other cognitive functions. She has to say that his berserker condition is much milder compared to others. Lapis smiled broadly and asked if it wasn't obvious. The girl excitedly asked what was more important than what happened after he threw his long sword. At this time in the guild, the girl looked at the documents and said loudly that she was grateful for their report on the circumstances of the investigation of the ruins. The girl went on to say that she was glad to hear that they had all returned safely. She asks them to take hers. The reward is with the next administrator. The employee said that about the tokens they brought. There is no doubt that it belongs to the members of the silver rank team who also accepted the request. She showed the badge and said that the name of the leader of that group. They will organize an additional search of the ruins to find the remaining relics and artifacts. Anyway, they'll deal with it later. They can leave it to her. Ritz and his team left the guild. The man stopped and said that he had only heard his name once before. It would be better if he heard it from himself. He looked at the team and said that after receiving the request for an investigation, they barely managed to find any treasure or artifact. They will deduct the training and medical expenses after the mission. They are broke. Nim said with a smile that, however, they had all returned alive. She remembered how Rorin had fought desperately against the goblins to save their team from death. Colt remembered how the man threw his sword at the equipment, but could not withstand such tension and fainted. The old man said that he was sincerely grateful that they had run into these two. Chuck said that by thinking about it now. Back then, in the control room, this guy was just amazing. He even thought that he was the mercenary from the rumors. He went on to say that the one with the body is like the wind. When this wind blows by, everything that stood in its way turns out to be torn to shreds. Ritz asked what he was saying about a mercenary named Cleaver Wind. The guy said it couldn't be him. How could such a famous mercenary be a bronze rank adventurer? His friend screamed that even so, he thinks that 2 or 3 other people are capable of this. The team set off on their way. Chuck and Nim were arguing because the girl hit him on the head when he started talking nonsense. They began to go further and further away. Lapis told Rorin that therefore, as soon as the device was destroyed, the lock was removed. That's why the order to cancel and sleep embedded in the relic worked. The girl added with a smile that these ruins were useless now. As a result, the main device was completely destroyed, and because of this necklace, all the inner magic circles were scattered. She said that unfortunately for Ritz and others, the reward was not very good, so they were unhappy with them. Lapis thought half of it was a joke. Rorin replied that, given that they couldn't find anything useful in the course of the research, it's not surprising. The guy added that although the investigation was considered a failure, it was not completely useless. It seems that they have received quite a large reward. Lapis replied that even so, she had done something she shouldn't. Rorin looked at her intently and wondered if he should go and apologize too. Lapis looked at him. She could see what was on his mind again from the look on his face. She thought, with a smile, that it would be a problem if they had some strange connections with Ritz and the others. Lapis said she had heard that they wanted to seal the deactivated ruins later. The girl continued to say that she thinks this place is no longer used in any way, so they can just leave it, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Rorin replied that he understood. The guy asked with interest, so who brought him here, and where this hospital is located? Lapis looked into his eyes and replied, as for who brought it, it was her. Lapis said she couldn't leave it to Ritz and the others. Although they offered help, they also had wounded, and as for the second question, they are now in Kaffa. Rorin awkwardly replied that he sounded like he was causing a lot of trouble. Lapis replied with a smile that it was nothing, no need to worry about it. Speaking of failed tasks, their order to eliminate goblins turned into a problem. They failed to exterminate the goblin nest, and that they have no proof that they won. Rorin excitedly asked what was wrong with that bag with the ears. Lapis replied that it looked like she got lost during the last battle. The guy shouted in displeasure that it couldn't be. Lapis thought that because Ritz didn't want to leave as soon as Rorin fainted, he failed to collect any materials from the surrounding goblins to use as proof of victory. The girl continued to reason that she didn't want to become a burden. Rorin shouted in displeasure that it was such a shame, but at least he got out of there alive. Suddenly, Rorin stopped talking and looked at the ceiling. He remembered how the other team had fought the goblins, but they had failed to win. The guy said it was true. Rorin said they were reckless, but they weren't really bad people. The guy closed his eyes and thought about something. He was just silent for a few seconds. Rorin opened his eyes and said she wasn't that bad. Lapis smiled broadly and said she was grateful to him. It is quite possible that the intelligence unit can find and rescue those girls. After all, they were just ordinary goblins. Lapis said loudly that this meant that they had not received any awards at their request. Besides, they had brought some expenses due to the trip. Rorin flinched at her words. The girl went on to say that she had already used the money from his wallet to pay for the transportation. However, paying for his treatment and hospital accommodation is a completely different matter. Lapis said that in fact, she paid for all this out of her own pocket, hoping that he would reimburse her for everything. He was unconscious for about 3 days, including a day on the road. She added the cost of treatment and accommodation for 2 days and 1 night. The girl smiled broadly and said that it turned out to be about 5 silver coins. Rorin groaned wearily when he heard the amount. Suddenly, the girl leaned towards him and shouted that he didn't have to worry about it. Lapis said that he only needed to return what he owed her. She would not add interest on it. Rorin said that even so, he would not be able to afford it. The girl said that she would not force him to pay everything at once. He understands her. She would even let him pay it off in installments. Rorin asked that these conditions were not too good. She thought it was all about the deal. Lapis thought that she had intentionally taken care of him herself and was left penniless. She understands that it is cruel to hold him with a monetary debt, but she doesn't care. She said that in exchange. The girl screamed loudly that she wanted him to travel with her. Lapis grabbed his chest and looked into his eyes. Rorin stared at her in shock. She thought that if she traveled with the swordsman, they would fulfill the minimum group size requirement. This will keep annoying parasites at bay. The girl continued to reason that besides, Rowan is a mighty warrior. Even though he knew she was from the hated kin demon race, his attitude hadn't changed, and more importantly, Lapis thought that he was a reliable person and her savior. The girl clutched her skirt to control her emotions. She really wanted Rorin to stay with her. She said that, putting the money problem aside, it would be useful for him to travel with the priestess. She thinks it's a good deal. She excitedly asked what he would say about her proposal. Rorin replied that it didn't look like he could refuse. She excitedly asked what it meant that he agreed. The girl jumped on his chest and approached his face. The guy screamed furiously so that she would only promise that it would be until he repaid her. Pialis smiled broadly and happily replied that it was fine, as he wished. The girl shouted that she was looking forward to working together. Rorin replied that he was fine. He asked, displeased, what else could she get off him? Lapis excitedly thought that, by the way, it was a secret, but for her this request was a plus. The girl was very glad that this situation ended well for her. She thought they were in the caretaker's room looking for a manual. She covered up that even the thief didn't notice anything. Most of the items had some kind of magical enchantment. That locket was from that room. The girl continued to argue that so far money is not a problem. She feels sorry for Rorin, but from now on his debt will only increase, so that's it. The girl thought that she was looking forward to this adventure. Rorin the sword and the copper rank adventurer are sent to him, and with him Lapis the priestess and the copper rank adventurer. Rorin was listening to the two guys talking. One said that the village had been destroyed. His friend asked in surprise what was happening again and where. He was told that the pioneer village was in the north. It had happened before. The guy said that with the expansion of farmland and taxes, you can collect more, which only benefits the rich. Here they are implementing their plans to conquer new lands. This is the only way to properly protect the peasants. His friend said that they would squeeze them out. Only destruction and death did not bother anyone. The guy replied that money rules this world. Rorin listened to them attentively. Rorin thought so. People will not give up money of their own free will, whether they are peasants, kings, aristocrats, mercenaries, or adventurers. He is absolutely sure of it. The guy said wearily that it was money. He grabbed a mug and gulped down his drink. Rorin lay down on the table and sighed loudly. A girl came up and asked what the gentleman was drinking in the morning. The girl said that despite the fact that he had been in the hospital for 2 days, she can understand his desire to drink, but he only has money for it all she is interested to hear. She asked what he had forgotten. Rorin thought wearily that his mercenary squad had been destroyed and he was forced to become an adventurer. The first unpleasant task came to an end and he had a friend. He thought that this companion was the demoness Lapis. The girl looked at him and said that alcohol is a head on an empty stomach, especially after an illness. Rorin said she knew, that he doesn't have any money. Lapis screamed loudly that of course she would pay. She told the waitress that she had a sandwich with eggs and no mustard, and he had ham. Rorin thought she was a priestess serving the god of knowledge, but she was also quite smart. She added that they should be counted together. Rorin thought that she could use divine spells as well as demon magic. He started working with her, thinking that as a beginner like him, everything should work out. Rorin thought with displeasure that for some reason he could only sigh heavily. He asked how much a ham sandwich cost. Lapis replied that there were 5 copper coins, the same as with eggs. The guy put his head on the table and said that the debt was growing. The girl replied that then you can't sit around. Rorin thought that yes, having money problems, he became an adventurer. Rorin thought that there was no money, which is why all the costs now lie on Lapis. He works with her until he pays back the debt. Lapis took a bite of the sandwich and said it was quite tasty. The guy thought that only when it happens. Lapis told the guy to try his own. He wants to work, but he's left without a weapon. Rorin said with displeasure that the requests he could take without weapons. Rorin added that only ditches should be cleaned. Lapis said that no, the smell would remain. He said he was going to work with her, and she didn't want him to smell like him. The girl went on to say that she knows how to get rid of the swing. She can borrow the remedy. Then she doesn't mind. Rorin asked if there were any assignments he could accept. Rorin said with a smile that they could talk about difficult things later, but for now they would just eat. Rorin replied that they weren't that complicated. The guy at the next table told his friends to look at that guy. The man looked at Rorin and said with a laugh that he was a loser. He is also of the copper rank. As he envies him, his woman feeds him. If only they could live like this. Rorin looked at their tokens and thought they were iron rank. Lapis told him to just ignore them. The guy replied that once you get away with it, they will continue to continue. The girl said that these were some kind of mercenary principles. She doesn't really understand, but it's stupid to rush at everyone. They don't even have a woman who would do that for them. Rorin looked at her in shock, and the other guys shouted what she had just said. Rorin chuckled and said that she had provoked him well. He's going to kill them now. She replied that it was impossible, then they would become criminals. Lapis said that 90% of misunderstandings among adventurers lead to casualties. You can't go through their pockets. It wasn't enough to get them caught stealing. In addition, you will have to pay for damage to property. The girl added with a smile that she would pay for everything, so she could destroy whatever she wanted. Rorin said that this was already overstepping the bounds. The guys ran up to Rorin and shouted that if he lay down on the ground and went to beg for mercy, they were sure that the girl would be spared. She's a priestess. They can use her. The guys shouted furiously that it was great, they could start. Rorin clenched his hands and rushed at them with his fists. He was very calm because he knew he was going to win. The villains screamed loudly when Rorin hit them. One flew into the wall and left a dent in it. An employee came up with a broom and a bag so they could clean up after themselves. Lapis said with displeasure, "How can you even say such a thing in front of an innocent girl? They are just rude." As a result, she got into a fight. Still, collecting medicinal herbs is a fairly simple option. The couple ended up in the woods. Rorin replied that he would collect medicinal herbs in the forest near the city. There are no dangerous monsters here, so you can even walk with your bare hands. Lapis replied that they give 2 copper coins for 1 herb. Rorin pulled out the plant and thought that this was it. Lapis also began to collect. Rorin asked why she started picking herbs. The girl replied to earn money too. Lapis said it would be bad if she couldn't lend him money. By the way, isn't he missing a lot? Rorin replied with displeasure that he was not very good at it. If it was a matter of battle, he would have paid it off quickly. The girl said with a smile that only he had nothing to fight with. Rorin said that yes, she was right. Still, he won't be able to collect much, and that's not very good. Lapis clutched the bag of herbs and asked what could be done. The request is ordinary. Someone always puts it up. Rorin replied that she was right. He asked that they could go back. The girl said that the price of a hotel room recommended by the Adventurers Guild was 30 copper coins. The minimum cost of food is from 5 to 7 coins, and a glass of booze is 2 coins, that is, 45 to 53 coins are needed per day. Lapis followed Rorin and said that she was offering to give him more money and buy the necessary things. Rorin said wearily that it was necessary to think about it. You just can't make a decision like that. She asked how the adventurers of the copper rank generally live. Rorin replied that they were living in debt. Lapis said that if the most sensible way is needed, then it's worth raising the rank. Rorin thought that the mercenaries had done very well in matters of money. Rorin said that it should be all the efforts of the commander and the accountant. The girl replied that no matter what the conditions were, it was necessary to live somehow. The guy stopped abruptly. Rorin handed the bag of herbs to Lapis, who looked at him in surprise. She asked with interest that he wanted her to carry his things. He replied that no, she might not make any noise. He said tensely that someone was there. Rorin put his hand over the girl and walked forward. Lapis excitedly asked that if there was someone there, it might be better to escape. The guy replied that he could. Rorin said with displeasure that he had a bad feeling. The guy stared ahead and took a few steps to find out what was going on there. Lapis did not wait for him on the spot, but simply followed him. She also really wanted to know what had happened there. Rorin stopped abruptly, and the girl stood next to him. The couple saw a girl who was sleeping on the ground. Rorin shouted in shock that it was a girl. The guy did not expect at all that he would see her in the forest. Rorin excitedly asked where she was from. Lapis quickly ran up to her and touched her. The guy assumed that she got lost in his forest and couldn't find her way home. Lapis examined the girl and said that she was barefoot and her feet were not injured. Her clothes are clean. I don't think she came here herself. She has no muscles, and the skin on her arms and legs is not rough at all. She was well taken care of. It looks like she's from some noble family. Rorin said what she was doing here then. He really doesn't like it. Suddenly, he heard strange noises and turned his head towards the trees. He shouted loudly that there were forest wolves here. The guy told Lapis that he would deal with them and save the girl. She doesn't mind. The girl replied that no, but how could he be without a weapon? Rorin shouted that there was no problem. The wolves quickly ran at Rorin, who said he could handle the dogs anyway. He grabbed the wolf by the torso and repeatedly hit him on the back and head. Rorin sent him into the air and dealt with the other wolves. Lapis awkwardly thought that she remembered something in the morning. The guy asked if they could be eaten. Lapis replied that the meat was not edible, but the skin could be sold. The guy looked at the girl and asked how she was. Lapis replied that there were no external wounds. Everything seemed to be fine. She's lucky after all. They found her before the wolves got to her. Rorin said that yes, if someone is unlucky, then someone will be so lucky. Lapis laughingly said that in that case, there must be a person who is unlucky somewhere. He asked what they would do with the girl. Lapis replied that she couldn't leave her. Rorin said tensely that, of course, he didn't want to take her to the city with him, but when they returned, they would just leave her in the care of the guild. The guy picked her up. Rorin looked at her worriedly. Lapis asked what it was. The guy replied that no, she was just very light. The girl said, which is strange, she seems to be plump. Lapis asked with interest who she was, and why she was lying unconscious in the forest. Rorin replied that they needed to wait for her to wake up. He thought that was it. Lapis said that no matter how it was mistaken for a kidnapping, two villains took an innocent girl with them. Rorin said with displeasure that she didn't have to attribute it. Their new adventure began with meeting this girl. Rorin came into town with the girl and said that they had entered so calmly. Lapis replied that it would be another matter if they were criminals, but they calmly pass. The guy said it was great to be a priestess. Everyone believed them. They ended up in the city of Kaffa, in the Adventurers Guild. Rorin gently sat the girl down on the sofa, but she still hadn't come to her senses. The employee asked if they had saved a man in the forest. He replied that it was so. The girl examined the stranger and asked what was good. They would take custody. She did not mind. Rorin replied that there was no problem. He couldn't walk with her forever. The girl's assistants came up and took the girl to carry her into the room. They said she was so light. The employee said she wanted to talk to them in the guest room. Rorin said he was warning right away. It wasn't a kidnapping. The girl replied that she understood that the kidnappers would not bring their sacrifice to the guild. She just wants to talk. Lapis and Rorin looked at each other to decide whether they should go or not. They decided that they needed to talk. They followed the girl into the living room. She said they would get right to the point. The employee sat them down at the table and said that she was uncomfortable talking about it, but she would like to set restrictions on their movements for a while. Rorin asked in surprise, "What do you mean? Are there any questions for them?" The employee confidently said that no, nothing like that. They cannot worry. She said that the guild would just find out who this girl was. Until the results are received, I would not like them to do anything. Rorin asked if there was something wrong with the girl. The girl replied that she couldn't say anything at the moment. Rorin asked what the restrictions were and for how long. The employee replied that if deadlines are needed, then a few days until the results appear. They just want them not to leave the city. They can wait at the hotel. The guy looked at her intently and said with displeasure that it didn't make him feel any better. The girl said that the hotel on the main street is called Polychrome. Rorin said the name didn't mean anything to him. Lapis shouted loudly that Polychrome. This hotel is fighting for the place of the best in the city, high class as well as the price. The employee said that, of course, they take care of all the living expenses. If they need something out of convenience, they can use the guild name. They will pay for everything. Rorin said tensely that the treatment was too good. No mercenary will accept a job for which they promise mountains of gold. It is very suspicious. Lapis asked what they wanted them to do so that they pretended not to notice anything. Rorin said it went against her morals. The girl shouted that she was against such treatment. Rorin asked what was wrong with that girl. Lapis shouted that they understood that they would not allow their actions to be limited without explanation. She should explain at least the most basic thing, whether it can somehow have a detrimental effect on them. The employee replied that she thought the probability of this was extremely low. Actually, several people inside the guild know her, but to make sure she needs to wake up and it can take several days. Lapis said that it was clear, so they wanted to confirm the identity of the girl, and until they were sure that they had nothing to do with her, they wanted to keep them nearby. She added that she and Rorin can accept this when they are convinced that they are not connected in any way and just found the girl in the forest. They will no longer be suspected. But in the meantime, they can live for a few days at the expense of the guild. Rorin excitedly asked what it meant that they would take care of the hotel and the money. The employee replied with a smile that they would do everything. The Polychrome Hotel, they need a room for two. Rorin banged on the table and shouted that of course they had separate rooms. Otherwise, they wouldn't have agreed on anything. Lapis said with a smile that she didn't mind. The guy shouted that he was against it. They went outside, and Lapis said that perhaps this girl was not from this city and most likely of noble origin. She was alone in the middle of the forest. I wonder what happened. They will enjoy the drive to the hotel. Lapis noticed that Rorin was clutching his head and grimacing. She asked excitedly that he was tired. The guy replied that he just didn't like it, and that too. Rorin said it was like he couldn't strain his body at all. He doesn't think it's about excessive tension, but his whole body feels sluggish. Lapis replied that after what happened, he had recovered mentally, but not physically yet. At that time, the mysterious girl was sleeping in the room to which she was brought by the staff. Suddenly, she opened her eyes and looked in front of her. She finally woke up. 2 days later, the employee called the couple and said she wanted to tell them important news. Since the two of them are not to blame, the restrictions are lifted from them. They are grateful for their assistance. Lapis asked in surprise what it was all about. They weren't going to explain everything that happened. The girl replied that the guild decides what to do with the information. This information is only reported by a selective adventurer of iron rank and above. Lapis shouted furiously that they had brought the girl. She doesn't know what the information is, but they need to get an explanation. Rorin put out her hand and stopped the girl. She asked what it was. Rorin said he was asking for forgiveness. His companion was serving the god of knowledge. She wanted to know even what was hidden. The employee replied that she had heard that there were such people, but this was the guild's decision. The guy asked with a smile that this information had already been reported to whom it was necessary. At least they can find out that much. The employee replied that it was. They decided who they could provide the information to and passed it on. The guy grabbed Lapis and shouted that since they were innocent, they could leave, and they would leave the hotel today. The employee replied that she was grateful for the cooperation. Lapis ran after Rorin and screamed why he did that. She looked at him worriedly and then looked at him in surprise. The girl did not expect this. She asked what he was up to. Rorin replied that no matter how much pressure they put on her, she would keep her privacy. It's such a hassle to get a person who's been banned to talk, so it's worth asking someone who can talk. Lapis asked in surprise that he knew who to ask. Rorin replied that he did, so let's go look for it. He knows the name and the face, so they will manage quickly. The girl looked happily at the hand that Rorin was holding. The girl jumped and hugged the guy by the hand. Rorin said tensely that she knew. Lapis replied that she didn't know where to go, so he could guide her, Mr. Rorin. The guy and the girl went to various places and questioned employees and visitors. It was evening, and they went to the familiar door to talk. Rorin opened the door and said with a smile that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, although not so long ago. The guy asked with interest that they could sit next to each other if he didn't mind. Chuck asked that they know this place. Rorin replied that he had to ask around. Lapis said with a smile that it cost them 30 coppers, but it was necessary expenses, so she paid for everything. The guy held the mug up to his face and said that's what it means. He shouted to the waitress that he was asking for 2 more ales. Rorin replied that he didn't need to, although thank you very much. Chuck said they helped them out, he can at least thank them. Rorin replied that they hadn't done much and they had derailed all the work. The guy shouted not to talk nonsense. It didn't work out with the money, but it happens. Rorin said he was sorry. Chuck said it was okay, he didn't care about it, so that's not what they came to talk to him about. He asked with interest, then why? Rorin said they picked up a girl in the woods a couple of days ago. Chuck said that's how they were. The guild also told about this only to some who have a rank from iron and above. They came about this. The guy said that his partner wanted to get at least some information. Lapis awkwardly turned away and blushed. Chuck said that's how he understood. He went on to say that he was a silver rank adventurer, and they thought he would just give it all to them. Second-rate adventurers who talk too much about work do not rise to the silver rank. Rorin replied that he didn't think so. They just thought about who could sell them such information and remembered about him. Chuck said that although he saved him, if he promises not to tell you what he learned from him, he can tell you. The guy confidently said that he promised that he would not give him any problems. Lapis screamed that she was too. Chuck said with a smile that that was good. He immediately warns he cannot guarantee the truth of the information. The guy added that they could decide for themselves what to do with her. He would just tell her what he knew. It looks like the girl they brought is Senna Lombartia from the city-state of Hanza. Rorin asked what the Hansa was. Lapis replied that the city-state of Kanza is located 3 days south of Kaffa. It is a small country with the capital in the city of Kanza. She doesn't know Sen's name, but Lombartia is a kind of ruler. Rorin said she knows a lot. Chuck said that Senna was the only daughter of the ruling family. Their position is not exactly wow, but it's not worth being rude either. Rorin replied that he did. She asked why they were restricted in movement when they brought her in. Chuck replied that it was simple, they didn't want them to talk. A sweet young lady is abandoned alone in the middle of the forest. Lovers of chatter will immediately trumpet everything. Chuck said that when you help people, you usually get a reward, but they won't get anything, because, first of all, no one asked. Secondly, because there is no one to confirm whether it is really hay. Lapis asked with interest that it was impossible to find out who she was in these 2 days. Chuck said that no one was reporting anything to him, so he would not answer this question. He said that the guild suspects that she's real. Only the messenger from Hanza has returned. Lapis said that they are not limited to the guild. The messenger from the organization is given a magical tool that allows him to report his location. Apparently, the connection has disappeared. Chuck said that in general, the guild thought that this was not the kind of partner that should be given a lot of attention, but it was also not worth angering him. So they gathered several groups with an iron rank and will send the girl. He added that the payment was modest, so the adventurers of the silver rank did not participate. Lapis thoughtfully asked what it would take for them to get in there too. Chuck asked if something was wrong. Lapis replied that no, it was just curiosity. Why a young lady from an aristocratic family who lived in prosperity ended up in the middle of the forest 3 days away from home. Rorin lowered his head and groaned wearily. Lapis screamed that it was not surprising that she wanted to know about everything. The guy said that no one would call them with the bronze rank. She shouted that there was some way around it. Chuck said there was a way at all. This is a special case. If an adventurer of the silver rank recommends, an adventurer of the copper rank can be taken, as if he is an iron one. What if Ritz sends this request? Lapis joyfully shouted that it was just wonderful, very much. Suddenly, Rorin grabbed her and put his hand over her mouth. The girl mumbled in displeasure, but did not remove her hand. Rorin asked tensely that he was sure of his words. If they screw up, their reputation. Chuck replied that there was no problem. Ritz is likely to give the same answer. He's only offering, but if they do take it. The guy said that he would like him to get a weapon first. Rorin looked at Lapis and took his hand away. Wearily, he hid his face and said that no, it was just that. Lapis looked at him intently. Rorin awkwardly asked Chuck that he was asking for forgiveness, but if he could do something about the weapon in a day, maybe they would return to this conversation. Chuck laughed out loud and said that he was a weakling, just henpecked. I'll shout at him to shut up, he knows himself. Chuck said that if he came up with something in a day, then they would talk. He added that no one from the silver rank goes, and if they recommend them, then there will definitely be no problems. Rorin told Lapis that he was counting on her and she could lend him money. Lapis smiled and asked if he would buy a weapon. Rorin asked why else bother Chuck and the others. She asked when the departure time was. Chuck replied that he hadn't exactly asked, but after about 3 days. Lapis said that she could borrow money, but Rorin had to wait a day. She's just worried that she won't have enough. The girl went to the door and shouted that she would start slowing it down immediately. Chuck put his hand on a disgruntled Rorin and shouted with a smile that he had no business. They can sit down. It's not easy for them. They both fell in love with passionate women. The guy asked what made him think that. Chuck said he understood everything. He's the same. He's always pushing them around. He knows about feelings. But he knows, lately, he started to think that it's not so bad to be henpecked. He likes her bad temper, too. The next day, the door to the bar opened and 2 girls went inside. Lapis said that they spent the whole night here. It's very similar. Nim said that's where Chuck is. Lapis looked at the archer in surprise and said with a smile that they had not seen each other for a long time. The girl replied that it had been a long time, although it hasn't been that long. Lapis told Rorin that she was sorry. She had completely forgotten that they had not found a new place to live. She's already taken everything off, so he doesn't have to worry. She moved all the property. The guy said in surprise that, thank you. He asked how she got into his room. Lapis replied that she explained that they were partners, and she was immediately allowed in. Rorin thought that was normal too. Maybe it's because they came from the guild. Nim grabbed Chuck by his jacket and told him to wake up. Lapis asked with a smile what she was after, Mr. Chuck. The girl replied that, yes, she had come to pick up this worthless one. Rorin awkwardly said that he was asking for her forgiveness too. They just sat here for a while. The guy thought that although he was mostly listening to his love story, Nim looked at him intently. She said that Rorin is good. Lapis should take an example from him. The girl asked with displeasure what she meant by being bad. Nim replied that she could decide for herself. They don't have to worry, she will repay everything. She would tell Ritz that he was just bragging to his less experienced comrades. Nim smiled and said it was time to say goodbye. The couple went outside, and then the girl and the guy looked at each other in surprise. They were a little shocked. Rorin said he should apologize later. Lapis replied that she had said that everything was fine, and anyway, she was really so bad. He told her not to ask him. The girl said they needed to go to the gun store. Lapis said they needed to get weapons and armor. An adventurer cannot work without them. Rorin followed her. He decided it was better not to argue with the girl. She said his armor was already battered. It's time to buy a new one. Rorin replied that he had been using it since he was a mercenary. Lapis said they would take what would suit him. He can leave it to her. They went into a gun store. Lapis said that Mr. Rorin specializes in attack, so he should think about stronger armor than leather. She walked over to the mannequin on which the raincoat was hanging. Lapis told Rorin that here, she recommends this. The guy hesitantly said that it wasn't armor. Lapis said that it looks like an ordinary cloak, but in fact it is a magical item. Black Widow's web fabric is a good thing. It's only worth about 5 gold pieces. She added that protection and self-healing are imposed on it. Usually it is 10 times more expensive. He will put it on top of the leather armor, and it will multiply the protection. They will buy it. Lapis said the workers' problem is that they don't know about its real price. The salesman put down the newspaper and stared at the couple. Rorin stared at him awkwardly. He looked at Lapis excitedly and asked what he would not reveal. The girl replied that she would not reveal it, and if she did, the main thing was to buy before he corrected the price. The price tag was in place, and also, strangely, she saw it after all. Lapis went up to the owner and asked where he was. Had he already been sold? The old man replied that no one would buy it. It was too big to keep in the store. He took it inside. The girl excitedly said that he could move it. The man told her to be quiet. Several people helped to drag it. Rorin looked at her awkwardly. Lapis followed him, saying, "That's how it was. They can get him out of there." The old man replied that such a joke could not be handled so easily. Rorin looked around and thought that the store was small, but there was enough good stuff. Rorin picked up the dagger and thought that if money appeared, he could also look for auxiliary weapons, although it is unknown when this will happen. He looked at the sword and said that it was a good, long sword. Suddenly, a guy appeared who looked at Rorin in surprise. He came to his senses and shouted furiously what he was doing. He didn't like something very much. The guy shouted angrily at Rorin to take his hands off the sword. Rorin took his hands away and looked at him in surprise. The unknown man shouted that he had been looking for him for a long time. The guy took the sword in his hands and said with displeasure that, although he admits that he has a sense of good things, but such a weapon would not suit simple muscular fools like him. He should study his abilities better. The guy called the seller and said he would take it. Rorin looked at him in surprise. He didn't expect to meet such an unpleasant person, but he wasn't going to buy this sword either. Rorin thought that even though he didn't have any money, but who was he? Lapis asked excitedly if something had happened. The guy replied that everything was fine. This long sword was sold. The girl showed the sword, which was covered with a veil. She said that it certainly wasn't a bad sword either, but she had prepared better. It seemed to her that he was seriously giving in to this. Lapis quickly took off the veil and screamed that here he was. Rorin looked at the sword in shock and said that it was the same as how she was able to find it. It was simply impossible. The seller began to count things. He said they were buying a new leather armor, 50 silver, a coat, 5 gold, a weapon, 15 gold. There are also potions, a spare dagger, and so on. Lapis told Rorin that in the end, his debt is 23 gold and 80 silver coins. Rorin replied that it seemed that besides the property, he was already beginning to partially belong to her. The girl said that the adventurer's equipment was his property, so he didn't have to worry. They will have a new request tomorrow, so they should have a good rest. Lapis lay down in Rorin's bed and said goodnight with a smile. The guy grabbed her and carried her to another room, saying that her room was here, she would sleep in this one. The girl shouted in displeasure that it was necessary to book a double room. She shouldn't have decided to do as he said. Rorin shouted in displeasure that she was going to bed. Rorin walked wearily to the bed. The guy grabbed a pillow and dusted it off after Lapis. He fell onto the bed and groaned wearily. Rorin has been very tired these days. The guy looked at the ceiling and thought tensely that this would be his second assignment as an adventurer. The first task was not very successful, but he coped. Rorin continued to reason that he was sure such a request would attract many experienced adventurers, but others of the iron rank would definitely be there. In any case, he closed his eyes and thought that he could only hope that there would be a good team. The next day came. Lapis went to get the guy, and they came to the guild together. The employee said that, in order to confirm her participation, it is necessary to go to the hall and register they are here. The couple went inside, and Rorin stared at them all in shock. He saw a huge number of people. Suddenly, the guy who insulted him at the gun store noticed him. He looked up and stared at Rorin. He shouted furiously that he was the fool from yesterday. Rorin thought with displeasure that death was to his hopes for a normal team. He immediately met an unpleasant guy. The guy complained that he was an adventurer of the iron rank. There's just anyone hanging around now. Suddenly, he noticed a badge on Rorin's chest, which meant that he was participating in the mission. He angrily asked the guild employee that wasn't this a request for iron rank and above. The girl replied that they had a recommendation from the silver rank. The guy asked in surprise what she was saying. The employee said that according to the rules of the guild, the recommendation of an adventurer of silver rank allows you to equate a copper rank with an iron one. Based on this, they have every right to participate. Rorin smiled at him and thought that he would not be suing for having connections. The guy came up to Rorin and shouted furiously, which he had already said yesterday, so that he would know his place. He went on to say that he didn't know how he was so lucky, but he would give him advice. He must be careful and try not to interfere with him, otherwise he will run into trouble. Rorin replied that he agreed. He will not interfere with him and will stand aside. The guy asked with displeasure that he had only said that, and that was all he had to say. The employee excitedly told them to calm down. They will still need to jointly execute the request. The guy screamed that he couldn't believe he was being equated with someone like him. A familiar girl came in. She was the one who had previously communicated with Lapis and Rorin. She said the least they could do was stay out of the way. If his actions interfere with the execution of the request, the guild will impose a fine on him. The girl looked at Rorin and continued to say that they were once again being told that the guild did not see any problems with their participation. Silver rank adventurers confirm that they are capable of such tasks. She said that if they become an obstacle to fulfilling the request, they will be punished. If rank is so important to him, then the authority of the silver rank opinion should be weighty for him. The guy looked at her with displeasure and furiously replied that he understood. He walked away from the girl and Rorin. The employee exhaled wearily. It was finally over. She told Lapis and Rorin to keep in mind that their participation in such a request was a special case. She really asks them to try not to become participants in the problems. The guy awkwardly replied that he understood. The girl went on to say that at first she thought they just had good acquaintances, but it seems they are really worthy of the iron rank. She's happy about it. She stepped aside and said that was it. She picked up the magazine and said that the briefing would begin soon, but first they would check the availability of participants. Rorin told Lapis that it was surprising that she didn't say anything. Lapis replied that it seemed to her that arguing with such people was a waste of time. That's her style. Rorin replied that he did. The employee screamed that there were 23 people. She thanks everyone for participating in fulfilling this request. A little girl came into the room. The employee escorted her out, and her colleague loudly said that this request was an official request from the Adventurers Guild. The purpose of the request is... Everyone looked at her in surprise. The employee pointed to the girl and said that this was the escort of Senna Lombardia. They have to get her to the city-state. She has to get there safely. The girl bowed shyly and looked at the adventurers. The employee said that Senna is the daughter of the ruler of Hanza, so a respectful attitude is required. The girl continued to say that it was a 3-day journey to the city, so they prepared horse-drawn carriages. They must ensure that she gets home safely. She said that they had sent messengers to Hanza earlier to report the direction of the send to them, but none of them will return and have not contacted them, so you need to be careful on the way. The girl said that due to the increased risk, the payment will be 12 silver per person. The adventurer raised his hand and said that regarding the danger, the payment is not too small. The employee said that the danger itself and its level have not yet been confirmed. Of course, if the danger turns out to be higher, they will raise their payment. She added that this is why she asks not to worry about pain. It corresponds to the risk. The adventurers looked at her in surprise. They did not expect that the answer would be like this. Rorin thought tensely that this was despite the fact that the adventurers sent by the guild had not returned. You will have to bring evidence for the surcharge, poor conditions. The employee added that this was an official request from the guild. She looked at all the adventurers and said that it was now possible to refuse the request with the imposition of a fine. In case of successful completion of the request, in addition to the agreed reward, they will be given special privileges. The girl added that, therefore, they should treat the request responsibly. The girl looked excitedly at the team that was supposed to accompany her. Senna cried out in embarrassment that she was asking to be taken home. She can't promise now, but she will definitely tell her father and ask him to reward them additionally. The girl bowed low and said that she was asking for them very much. Senna couldn't wait to get home, so she's ready to promise anything. The adventurers began to think hard about what they cared about. It was a very risky task, for which they pay very little. Lapis raised her hand and smilingly told them to give them a contract. Rorin looked at Lapis and thought tensely that it was risky, but he could no longer refuse, because he was here on recommendation. The guy who was fighting with Rorin also took the contract. The morning of the request execution has arrived. Rorin stopped in front of the carts and stared at them in shock. He asked in surprise that they would go too. Lapis replied that if you walk, you won't get there in 3 days. The guy said that he had never participated in an escort before. In one laziness, the guild was able to prepare crews. The administrative resource of the guild is amazing. Lapis looked at him and said that his physical fitness was amazing, how easily he carried his sword. Rorin replied that he had been used to it for a long time. She said that there was still a lot of equipment. The guy replied that yes, but... Rorin asked, so what's the deal in the end? Lapis replied that there are 3 carts in total. After all, 23 adventurers are involved. In the first, 8 adventurers will go. In the second, Senna and 7 adventurers will go. And in the third, 8. Lapis walked up to the cart and said they would go to this one. They noticed that the adventurers were inside. One of the guys shouted for them to load faster, and they were so late. Rorin replied that it was fine. He grabbed onto the cart and tried to climb inside, but the cart began to wobble from side to side. The guy said sheepishly that it was so. He tried to put his foot up, but the cart tilted even more. Rorin took his foot away so that the cart stood up straight. The guy thought wearily that he was too heavy. The coachman asked in shock what was going on with the cart. He shouted loudly that he couldn't drive like that. Rorin didn't want it to happen that way, but he couldn't shrink in size. Lapis told the adventurers that there was nothing to be done. This side was listing badly. They'll have to move from this side to the other. One guy complained and asked why they had to crowd together. Rorin cried out in embarrassment that he was asking for forgiveness. He really has nothing to say for himself. The guy felt very awkward in this situation. The guy lowered his head to express his regret. The adventurers began to discuss what they could do. Rorin said he couldn't do anything about it, but he could help move the luggage. Rorin was able to climb into the wagon. He sat down in the middle, but still occupied a very large space in the cart. The guy awkwardly said that he was very grateful to them. One of the adventurers told him with a smile that they were still on the same team and should act together. The other guys smiled and looked at Rorin. The guy added that we need to help each other as much as possible. Rorin smiled at his words and wondered if they were really good people. He was able to relax for a while. A few hours later, the problem started. Rorin asked excitedly what was wrong with them. Lapis bent over the girl and examined her. She said she couldn't tell the diagnosis. The girl tensely added that she could tell for sure she was dead. A simple escort mission turned into a terrible event that no one could have predicted. Rorin looked at the body of the young girl and heard Lapis say that she was definitely dead. The guy grabbed his head and thought, why did this happen? It's a simple task. A few hours earlier. All the wagons stopped to rest for a while. Lapis and Rorin continued to sit in the carriage. The girl was reading a book and her friend was trying to sleep. Suddenly, someone said they were sorry for the inconvenience. It turned out to be the guy who was constantly trying to fight with Rorin. He shouted loudly that not only could he not find a place to sit, he was also causing trouble for others. Rorin wondered with displeasure why he was bothering him. He spoke so that he would listen to him. Suddenly, the man from Rorin's carriage shouted loudly for him to shut up already. The man continued to shout that the guild had already explained its decision. He can just get out of this wagon. Rorin looked at him in shock. He did not expect that they would stand up for him. The guy looked at him in surprise and took a deep breath. He turned around and began to walk away from the cart quickly. A girl noticed him and called him Crassus, but he passed her by. Rorin saw that Crassus was surrounded by a crowd of girls who traveled with him. He thought that the guy surrounded by girls was some kind of popular influence. Rorin said he was grateful for his help. Lapis said he was Mr. Brothers. The man replied with displeasure that he just doesn't like buffoons, that's all. Rorin asked Lapis with interest how she knew his name. The girl replied that the guild had given a list of participants in the task. She knows the names of all the participants. Lapis said that, by the way, Brose is an iron rank adventurer with 20 years of experience. Brose asked her if she wanted to hurt him with those words. She replied that no way. The girl said that he had been able to avoid serious injuries for 20 years. Given this, his skills and abilities can only command the deepest respect. Brothas quickly turned his head to the side. Lapis looked at him in surprise, and then noticed that the man's ears were red. The girl asked that he was embarrassed. Rorin said she makes too much noise, she can sit still. An employee of the guild went outside and shouted loudly for the coachman to get ready to leave. She checked that everyone is ready, so you can start the task. The coachman smilingly told the adventurers that they were 3 days away from Hanza. Bor shouted that good luck to him on the road. The man shouted to the horse to go. The 3 wagons set off. Lapis and Rorin were chatting. Other adventurers also talked to each other, and some even slept. The trip was going well. Rorin looked outside and noticed that the sun was almost down. He said it was getting dark. Bor said that it was dangerous to continue the trip at night. He told the coachman that he would soon have to look for a place to sleep. The coachman noticed that the carriage that was in front had stopped. He asked in surprise that they had stopped. Bors asked with interest what they wanted to camp here. The coachman excitedly replied that it was too early. He couldn't understand why the driver of the other carriage had stopped. The coachman said that the carriage ahead had stopped. Rorin looked ahead, and Bor spoke, which doesn't look like an ambush attack. He asked with interest what could be wrong with the cart. Rorin looked intently at the carriage and said that there wasn't some kind of strange atmosphere there. The guy felt something was wrong, but what exactly happened? Rorin said he would take a look. The guy went up to the coachman and shouted for him to pay attention to him. The man was hunched over in his seat. The guy asked if he had any problems. Rorin looked at the coachman's face and stared at him in shock. He saw that the man was shaking all over. He asked what happened to him. Rorin shouted what was wrong with him. The man put his hand over his mouth and said that no, everything was fine, just something was making him sick. The man tried to take off his shirt. He couldn't breathe. Rorin moved away from him and looked at the cart. He said that he was wondering how the passengers in the carriage were. The coachman shouted that they should be fine. The guy asked Rorin what it was. Rorin replied that the coachman was unwell. Bors asked in surprise what it was. He quickly approached the man and asked what happened to him. Bors shouted loudly for help. He orders mats to be laid out before setting up camp. Rorin asked the passengers that everything was fine there. He asks them to answer. Rorin shouted that he was going to open up. The guy lifted the curtain and stared at the passengers in shock. All the girls and boys inside were unconscious, and someone was clutching his head. Rorin excitedly shouted for Lapis to come here urgently. The girl helped the coachman at that time, but decided to see what Rorin found there. She came up to the cart and said that it was the same. She grabbed the woman by the arm and said tensely that she had unstable bullets and heavy breathing. "We need to get them out of the wagon." Rorin replied that he understood. Lapis turned her head and excitedly said that Mrs. Senna should be here. She saw a girl who was lying with her eyes closed, but looked healthy. Lapis said with a smile that she seemed to be just sleeping, so she didn't have to worry. Crassus ran to Rorin and called him angrily. He wants to fight with him again. He angrily asked what he was doing now, why he was slowing down traffic. Rorin didn't answer him. The guy carefully picked up the hay in his arms. He was very focused. Crassus shouted for him to answer his question. Rorin furiously said he was sorry, but he didn't have time. He must prepare for the deployment of the camp. The guy shouted at Bros to help him. Bros walked up to the wagon and asked Rorin what it was. He looked inside and started in surprise. Crassus looked at Rorin and shouted angrily for him to leave. Lapis walked through the clearing where the adventurers who were injured were lying. The girl sat down in front of one guy and took his face in her hands. Bros asked in surprise that priests were also taught medical skills. Rorin excitedly asked the girl if it was true. The girl put her hand on the forehead of the coachman, who was whispering something. Lapis replied that he quickly lost all his strength and was breathing heavily. The girl continued to say that he was not ill or injured. He was tired, but somehow unusual. It's not normal. He couldn't be so tired because too little time has passed since the beginning of their journey. Lapis lowered her head and said, as for the dead, she cannot understand the cause of death. She looked at the two girls and said that their heartbeat and breathing had just stopped. They just died. Someone shouted in shock that they were dead. What nonsense was she talking about? Rorin and Bruz moved closer to help the rest of the injured. Lapis didn't want to say that, but she had to. The adventurer shouted loudly that it was a lie. They were fine in the morning. They were just riding in a carriage. Boris asked wearily what it was. Lapis said he could check for himself. He needed at least some kind of diagnosis. Boris put his hand on the girl's neck and said that she was dead. Lapis replied that yes, both were definitely dead. Rorin thought tensely that he should be more careful. Lapis said loudly that she recommends burning the bodies. Boris shouted in surprise what she was saying and why they just couldn't bury them. She replied that this was not a failing option right now. Lapis said that if they did not want to be cremated, then it was better to return to the cafe immediately. Boris asked why. The girls said that they would most likely turn into undead soon. Rorin shouted in shock that how could this be? The undead are the living dead. Isn't this the result of necromancy or a curse? How can they become undead just like that? Lapis replied that there are cases when the dead turn into the undead because of attachment to the old life. Now we have to worry more about what to do with the bodies, and not about the cause of death. If he is in doubt, he can ask other priests. The girl looked at Crassus's team and said that there was one over there. The guy felt that they were looking at him and asked with displeasure what they wanted from him. Lapis said loudly that an adventurer with great potential was beautiful. His companions are the knight Layla, the magician Anji, and the priestess of the water god Loru, so you can ask her. The girl continued to say that she certainly did not know her abilities for sure, but it was immediately clear that Loru was a priest and would be able to tell a lot about these bodies. Crassus shouted in displeasure at her to do what she wanted, but do not touch them. Loru confidently said that the priests are obliged to accompany human souls, so she asks for permission. Loru approached two girls and put her spear on one of them. The girl put her hand on her chest and began to draw magical symbols. She spoke to the water god to show her the way. The girl's weapon lit up, and she said that she was asking to pave the way. She opened her eyes a little and looked at the two girls. Laura finished her ritual. Rorin said thoughtfully that she looked like a priest. Lapis asked with displeasure that she did not look like. Loru got up from the ground and dusted off her clothes. Boris asked what she had learned. Laura excitedly replied that she had been defiled. Soon they will turn into the undead. Rorin said what the hell was going on here. The girl bowed to him, which meant that her work was over. Boris tensely said that everything was very bad, but there was nothing to be done. It had already happened. First of all, you need to set up camp before the sun sets. After that, they will burn the corpses. He said loudly that it was necessary to take the bodies away from here. He asked for help with this. They should not shirk. These were their friends and comrades. Rorin and Lapis joined the others and began to help. One of the adventurers hysterically shouted what it was all about. They didn't even join the battle. Why would they become undead? He doesn't understand it. Someone can explain it to him. The guy continued to shout that he was sure it was related to the wagon. They were sitting in a carriage prepared by the guild, just like them, but it was bad only for those who were in the second carriage. Everything is fine, just with her. The guy glared at the Sen. Rorin and Lapis followed his gaze. At that time, she began to wake up. She was alive and well, but was she the cause of all the problems? People covered the girls' bodies with cloth and put firewood on top. Boars set them on fire and then stepped aside. The adventurers took off their masks and began to watch their friends burn. Lapis and Rorin sat to the side and looked at the bonfire. The girl said that it was getting very dangerous here. Rorin mumbled something and looked at the girl in front. Senna was sitting alone and no one approached her. A couple of adventurers looked at her in horror and quickly turned away from the girl. They were scared that they might get hurt by her too. The girl said in a frightened voice that she was scared. Her friend replied that she shouldn't look. She has a creepy look. Senna lowered her head to her knees so that no one could see her. Lapis put her hands to the fire to keep warm. The girl said he could do whatever he wanted. Rorin asked her if she didn't mind. The girl asked that she had a reason to stop him. Lapis smiled and put her hand on Rorin's forehead. She said that all she wanted was to be with him on his adventures. She hopes that one day he will make the same confession to her. Rorin looked at her intently and said that he never intended to stop her from doing anything. Lapis said that she was asking him to continue doing what he saw fit. The guy straightened his hair and awkwardly said that it was good not to come back after all. Senna was looking sadly in front of her at this time. She felt very uncomfortable here. Rorin quickly approached the girl and greeted her. He asked with a smile that she didn't want to eat with them. He would really like her to join them. The guy looked at her food and added that it was so boring to eat alone. Senna looked at him in surprise and then said that she had no appetite. Rorin said he was sorry. He excitedly said that she needed to eat at least a little. Tomorrow will be another difficult day. Senna replied that it was fine, but wouldn't her company interfere with them? Rorin pointed to Lapis and told her not to worry. His friend didn't mind at all. Senna tensely said that if it was true, then she wanted to push them out. Rorin took Senna to Lapis so they could eat together. Suddenly, he heard someone say that it was understandable. That's how he got close to the silver rank. Crassus added that he should have expected such sycophancy from him. For the sake of a good recommendation, it's clear to everyone that he's doing this for the rewards. Rorin thought with displeasure that it was him again. Rorin thought that no matter how many times he spoke, he didn't seem to understand the words. We need to throw something at him as soon as possible and leave these terrible words. Crassus said there was no reason for him to approach this one. Rorin took the log and thought he didn't care what he said about it. He doesn't want Senna to hear anything bad. The guy raised his hand, but only managed to close Sena's eyes so that she would not see anything. Another log flew past them and hit Crassus squarely in the face with a loud pop. The guy couldn't resist and fell to the ground. His girlfriends excitedly shouted what was wrong with him. Rorin looked at the guy in shock and thought that it was right in the head. Crassus's friend furiously shouted why. She turned to the side and was asked with displeasure what she was doing. Suddenly, she looked at Lapis's face and turned away in fright. She went to Crassus to help. Startled, Rorin asked Lapis that he could look at her. The girl smiled broadly and replied loudly that, of course. She came to her senses after an outburst of anger. Lapis happily continued to tell him why he couldn't look at her. It's all right. She asks him to hurry up and bring Senna to her. They should have started eating by now. Rorin looked at her uncertainly, but led Senna to her. Lapis handed the girl a mug and sat down next to her. She began to tell her something with a smile. Rorin was watching them closely. Morning came, and Bor shouted loudly for them to listen to the plan for the second day. He really wanted everyone to hear him, so that later there would be no questions, as well as mistakes. He said that, based on the results of the general discussion, they will continue to move to Hanza in such a composition there will be no return to Kaffa. The adventurers shouted that they expected the request to be dangerous. Those who are dead will no longer receive their reward. The adventurer who rode first with Rorin and Lapis looked at Bors with displeasure. The girl from the team said tensely that she did not mind continuing the request, but everyone started shouting that they would not go with Senna, not with her. The girl was sitting in the cart at that time and heard everything. She was very upset by such words. Borm said wearily that there was a problem. Rorin thought he understood him. Lapis asked if they could go with her. The guy looked at her intently. The girl said that the night was fine. They didn't want Senna to be alone, so they settled down next to her tent. They have been with her for quite a long time and feel fine. Lapis asked Rorin that he wanted Senna to be alone. Bors asked in surprise that they would go with her. Rorin confidently replied that they had spent the night in a place he didn't think there was anything wrong with her. Bors asked if they would really do it. They'll do a great service by doing this. It's not good to leave a client alone. Rorin asked if they would have enough wagons for the rest. Bors confidently replied that he still had no people who would ride in this cart, sit in a cramped space. As soon as something happened, they should immediately tell him. If something happens to him, it won't make it any easier for them. Senna was looking wearily at the street, but suddenly she heard rustling. She quickly turned her head and saw that Lapis and Rorin had come to her. The girl greeted her joyfully. Senna excitedly said that her brother and sister were here. Rorin smiled and asked if they could go with her. The girl smiled broadly. She was glad that she would not go alone. Rorin sat down in front of the girls and watched as Senna happily chatted with Lapis. The guy turned to the coachman with the question that he was okay. The man replied wearily that yes, somehow. Rorin looked at the coachman's face and thought that it looked like he was still unwell. It's only the second day and there are already a lot of problems. Most of the adventurers are already demoralized and depressed. The guy continued to reason that most likely something will happen in the future. Bors climbed into his cart and shouted loudly for everyone to go to their places. Rorin and Lapis should be as vigilant as possible. The wagons finally set off on their way. They lost a lot of time because of the undead, but now everything is more or less normal. Senna sadly asked that everything would be fine. Lapis put the girl's head on her shoulder and confidently said that everything would be fine. After all, they have a very strong mercenary with them. Rorin asked what she said about him. The girl asked that there was someone else here, Mr. Cutting Wind. Rorin awkwardly replied that he was sorry that he had disappointed expectations, but it wasn't him. He is often confused with him. The guy went on to say that she seemed to have made a mistake. He doesn't have any nickname. Lapis looked at him intently and asked that he knew the one called Cleaving Wind. Rorin shouted confidently that he didn't know him. Anyone who meets him on the battlefield dies. He was careful enough never to run into him. Lapis asked with a smile that he was often called incompetent. Rorin replied that it happens. The girl said that it was clear, so he was right. She reached out to Senna and hugged her. A few hours later, the adventurers are still on their way. Lapis yawned loudly and said that she was very bored. They'd been driving for so long and nothing was happening at all. The coachman said wearily that they would soon be looking for a place to rest. Rorin looked at the street and thought that time had passed very quickly for him. The guy asked in surprise, "What is it? So someone is on the road?" The coachman asked what travelers they were. The carts began to stop one by one in front of the crowd. Rorin was watching them closely. People stood like dolls. They practically did not move, and their heads were raised high up or vice versa lowered down. Rorin said he would take a look. He went up to Bors and asked what happened. Bors replied that people were standing on the road and blocking the way, but something was wrong with them. Rorin replied that if you look closely, they look like... The guy stopped abruptly. He thought that, judging by their clothes, they looked like ordinary citizens, but was there a village or a city nearby? The adventurer approached the crowd and shouted discontentedly for them to listen to him. The guy angrily asked what they had forgotten here. They are preventing them from passing. They are aware. The townspeople did not react to the guy's words in any way. They remained standing in their place. He walked up to the nearest man and asked, displeased, that he had heard him. Rorin excitedly shouted that something was wrong with them. He had to be careful. The man abruptly turned around and began to make strange faces. His eyes rolled back and his hands began to shake. Suddenly, he bit the adventurer's arm with great force. The adventurer screamed in fright because the monster was able to chew through his armor. Bros rushed to his aid. Rorin stared at this picture in shock. He did not expect this. The guy tried to push the monster away. He shouted furiously what was going on here. The adventurer grabbed the strange man by the head, but he did not want to let him go. The guy who was standing next to him grabbed his spear and shouted loudly for him to let go. Why was he clinging to it so much? He began to beat the monster with all his might. Bors shouted that he would help him now. The man ran up to his friends and chopped up the monster, which finally let go. Bors shouted in shock that it was really difficult. He looked ahead and saw that other monsters were starting to approach. Bors screamed in fright. What's wrong with them? Aren't they ordinary people? Karsa's girlfriend screamed loudly for everyone to pay attention. It's undead. The man shouted that the sun was shining now. Bors shouted furiously that everyone should come out to fight. He ran at the undead to protect the camp. Suddenly, Crassus ran past him with great speed and hit the monster. The guy confidently shouted that zombies were not his rivals. His girlfriend excitedly screamed at him not to run too far. Maz from their team asked that he didn't need help because the amount of magic was limited. Bors shouted loudly that he should go. He looked at the wounded guy and excitedly spoke to the priest to come here. He really needs his help. Kars stopped and turned his head sharply. He noticed a zombie that was covered in wounds but was still moving. The guy thought tensely that it was necessary to cut off his neck. The guy said that it is not customary to cut ordinary people, but they are no longer people. We must not forget about this. Kars waved his sword furiously and shouted loudly for him to die again. Cross's friend was destroying zombies, but it took a very long time. She had to hit the exact neck to chop off the head, otherwise she would not kill the monster. The girl shouted loudly to the priestess that these were not just zombies, they were different from standard zombies. The priestess looked at the zombie in fright and replied that, yes, it was. Lapis told Rorin that they were Revenants. She asked with a smile that he did not want to participate. She'd already brought the sword. The guy asked what was needed. Everything seemed to be fine. She said with a smile that it was so heavy, only Rorin could lift it. The guy took the sword in his hands and awkwardly said that he shouldn't have bothered so much, but it seems that his help is not really needed. Lapis looked at him intently and replied that if you look at it that way, Rorin looked at Kars and said that's what he was, an iron rank. He looks like he can only get in the way of help. He asked what she had said about the Revenants. Lapis said that they are more powerful undead than zombies. The girl said that the Revenant comes from the word returned. As a rule, the reason for this is like a zombie. The girl knew quite a lot about these creatures. Lapis said that this is a person who is strongly obsessed with the world of the living or revived by the higher undead. Sometimes the magic of the living is involved. He is, of course, more dangerous and stronger than a zombie, but he does not surpass the strength of an ordinary person. The girl thoughtfully said that, in short, a Revenant is stronger than a zombie. If they have a numerical advantage, then they can create big problems, even for the iron rank. Rorin replied that that was how it was. He thought tensely that if so, then why were there more than a dozen of them here? It doesn't look like there could be a cemetery or a battlefield in the middle of the road. What could be the reason, or is there still something? There is a higher undead hiding somewhere. Rorin continued to reason. When it comes to the higher undead, everything seems to be as complicated as with humans. Of the higher ones, he knows only as a vampire. He said you shouldn't worry about them. Bors asked what he was talking about. Rorin asked what he saw when that guy was bitten. Bors replied that, thanks to the equipment, he was not bitten deeply, but because they dug into his hands. He asked what it was. Rorin replied that Krasis was fighting the latter. The guy stared at the zombie intently, and then smiled broadly. He said that it was so. He was extreme. The whole group looked at him excitedly. Krasis grabbed his sword and pointed it at the zombies. He put all his strength into this blow and loaded his weapon with it. He quickly ran forward to slay the enemy. Bors looked at him in shock and shouted loudly what it was. Rorin also didn't understand what was going on. Lapis watched intently as Krasis dealt with the zombies. The guy smiled broadly. He turned his head and looked at the team. Krasis shouted loudly that that was it. The guy alone dealt with a huge number of zombies. The magician shouted in displeasure that this was all. The girls surrounded the guy and shouted in displeasure that he just decided to stand out. He's so stupid for doing that. They continued to shout that they asked not to use it just like that, especially for such trifles. They don't know who can see it. You shouldn't reveal your abilities. Krasis confusedly said that on. Bors asked in shock why he had just shone and disappeared like lightning. He asked Rorin that he had seen it. The guy replied that in principle. Rorin thought excitedly that if he had used it for the first time, he wasn't sure he would have been able to fend off such an attack. Such speed is amazing, and the force that cut the Revenant's body in half. The guide tensely asked what it was. Lapis bent down and looked at his worried face. She asked what he was saying about it. The girl laughed softly. Bors asked her if she knew what it was. Lapis smiled and confidently replied that, of course, she is a servant of the god of knowledge. Most likely, this is an enhancement. He asked what magic it was. The girl replied that no, but it looks like the magic of support. Support enhances a person's abilities. Enhancement is a gift that enhances the person, objects, or living beings to whom it is applied. Bors said it was very convenient. Lapis said it was an extremely rare gift. Usually, it is such people who receive the titles of brave men and heroes. Rorin wondered what was the difference between a brave man and a hero. Lapis looked at Krasis and said that most likely there was an adventurer's guild behind him. It is most likely that it is supervised by the state. Rorin said that talent is the best thing for a braggart, although it doesn't matter anymore. Rorin said that after this job, they probably won't see each other again. Suddenly, he went somewhere. Lapis asked in surprise what he was going to do. The guy replied that it was nothing serious yet. He approached the bodies and said that they should be laid to rest. It would be wild to leave them like this. Lapis smiled and sat down next to him. She said he was right. Bors and Rorin were burying people's bodies. Suddenly, one of the adventurers shouted loudly that it was time to turn back and return the cuffs. People suddenly fall down and die. In addition, the undead attack in broad daylight. He continued to shout loudly, which must be why the previous guilds had disappeared. Maybe they should go back to the guild and reorganize. Someone said that he thought they had all agreed to continue the task. He shouted that it was before the monsters appeared. The girl replied that if they did not complete the task, penalties would be imposed. The guy shouted that a lot of friends had died there. Bors stuck a shovel into the ground and said loudly that they should all calm down. He has repeatedly said that they went on this adventure knowing full well that there was danger ahead. He went on to say that, by the way, they are now much closer to Hanza than in Kaffa. As soon as they get to the city, they will receive a reward for the task. Bors said that if they guys still disagree, they can discuss and vote again. The adventurer who was injured by the zombie screamed that he was not going to return. He didn't join in order to feed his hand to the rebels. The guy shouted furiously that this was the scariest assignment he had ever had, and he was going to get a huge reward for this brat. Senna quietly sat down in the carriage. Someone shouted that such brave words, but what can he do when he is injured? The guy shouted at him to shut up, his left arm is fine. Boris said they were moving on, he understood correctly. Rorin looked excitedly at the graves, and said that these rebels. He didn't find a single clue where they all came from. He examined their belongings before burial. The guy said that no one had anything remarkable to identify them, just a couple of wallets, accessories, and other things. He doesn't see any villages or towns nearby where they might have come from. Rorin said that without understanding where they came from, they could not choose a route to get around them. In fact, they have no idea how many of them are roaming around here. He thinks the only option is to move cautiously. An adventurer approached Crassus and shouted that he now saw him in a better light. He killed these rebels in an instant. Now he is sure that nothing will happen to them. The guy turned and looked at Rorin with a smile. He was showing that he was much better than him. Rorin looked at him with displeasure and thought that he was simply amazed at him. Bor said that if there were no objections, but they had better continue on their way. They should be in Hanza tomorrow. He asked Rorin when he started acting like a team leader. Rorin replied that it was a little late to talk about it. Rorin climbed into the cart. Senna shouted joyfully that her brother was here. Lapis said with a smile that she was grateful for his hard work. Rorin said he was sorry for making me wait. The coachman replied that there was no problem. Rorin looked at him intently. At that time, Rorin thought that if he had known that he would have to go through all this, perhaps it would have been better to return to Kaffa. The adventurer shouted that it was funny, he must be laughing at him. It couldn't be. The adventurer screamed in fright that for no reason in the world would he be food for these monsters. The zombies grabbed a guy who screamed loudly for him to stop. He asks for help. Shocked, Rorin said that it wasn't a matter of being careful or not being careful. In his opinion, there are simply too many of them. A crowd of zombies began to approach them. Rorin and Lipia stared in surprise at the monsters who began to smash up the camp and kill people. Crassus ran out of the tent and shouted loudly what was going on here. They were everywhere. Crassus shouted loudly that he couldn't handle all of them alone. The guy began to swing his sword and destroy monsters, but there were too many of them for one person. Rorin grabbed his sword and tensely asked Lapis that all the rebels were here. The girl hugged Senna and replied that no, most of them were zombies. Rorin replied that he understood. He asked them to stand here. The guy went to the monsters to finally get rid of them. Senna excitedly shouted what her brother was doing. Lapis grabbed her and said with a smile that he would be fine. Rorin turned the sword around and said that he couldn't believe that the first thing he would cut through this handsome man would be rotting flesh. The guy looked at his beautiful sword and raised it high. The guy stared at the zombies and ran at them. He swung with all his might to defeat them. Rorin began to quickly destroy the zombies. He dealt with them with great speed. Lapis looked at him with a smile, and Sina was surprised by his strength. Rorin smiled and ran his hand over his sword. He said with a smile, "What an awfully awesome sword." Lapis covered her mouth with her hand and laughed at his reaction. Bors shouted loudly that he was waving this big monster so easily. Rorin replied that it was possible to get used to it. Rorin hit the monster with it and asked if he was okay. The man replied in shock that of course. Rorin asked, more importantly, what they were going to do about it, why all these guys had appeared out of nowhere. Lapis replied that she believed it was because they were the only living creatures in the area. The girl added that they flock here like moths to a flame. Rorin said that, of course, he did not want to impose himself again. He asked Bros if he wanted to move forward or backward. Bors confidently said that it did not look like he was the leader here. Rorin confidently said that in any case, he was not going to solve this issue alone, only together. Bros said loudly that then they should go to Hanza. After all they've been through, there's no way they can turn back. Rorin shouted that if that was the case, he thought they had a better chance of survival if they went to Hanza. Bros said he doubted the whole city had fallen. He asked Lapis if she had any objections. The girl replied that she had nothing concrete. Rorin replied that that was settled, some wagons were still intact. Lapis replied that they had found one hole, but there was only one horse. He asked if it was because of the zombies. Lapis replied that they were not attacking horses. They only attacked those who looked like them while they were alive. The girl said no, they left. The coachmen of the first and third wagons took the horses. The guy ran away screaming that his family was waiting for him. He was terribly scared. Bros said he couldn't stop them. Rorin asked tensely what it was. This is inevitable in their circumstances. He will take care of the undead around, and he can harness the rest of the horses, and Lapis should take the sen and get ready to go. Rorin asked if the coachman of the second carriage was alive. They needed a coachman to set off. Senna excitedly shouted that she had seen him before. He was nearby, in the trees. Senna brought Lapis to him and screamed that here he was. The girl approached a man who was sitting near a tree with his head down. She looked at him excitedly. Lapis said wearily that this coachman, he had already started to turn into an undead. Rorin looked at her intently, but he didn't look too surprised. Rorin remembered how the coachman looked before they stopped. The guy thought it was his puncture. He knew he wasn't feeling very well. The guy closed his eyes and exhaled. Lapis and Senna moved aside. Rorin walked up to the coachman and raised his sword over him. The guy thought he was asking for forgiveness. He couldn't give him a decent send-off. Bro said that he had prepared a cart, but no one knows how to drive. He excitedly asked what they would do. He had never done this before. Lapis coughed to get attention. The girl jumped into the driver's seat and shouted that this was where she, the priestess of the god of knowledge, should intervene. Bors asked in surprise that she could drive the cart. Lapis laughed proudly. Lapis looked at Senna and excitedly asked what was really convenient for her. The girl nodded, which meant yes. The girl screamed for Rorin to hurry up. They were all ready. Rorin swung his sword and destroyed the zombies. He looked around to make sure that there were no more monsters. He pressed his lips together tiredly and walked forward. The guy managed to deal with so many zombies. Rorin shouted loudly for all the survivors to gather here. He really asks you to do it quickly. They are going to force their way to Hanza's city. He waited a few seconds, but no one came. The guy was disappointed to think that he knew that there was no one else besides them. Everyone's already dead, right? Suddenly, he heard rapid footsteps and turned his head excitedly. He saw cars and his team. The guy said with displeasure that he could not even think that of all people he would stay alive. Rorin looked at him in surprise. Crosses said again that he couldn't even think that of all people, he would be the one to stay alive. Rorin said it was his phrase. The guy thought he knew. He said the survivors should pack up, but this guy. Rorin grinned with displeasure and thought that his luck was very bad. Crassus asked what they were going to Hanza for. Does he have any kind of plan at all? Rorin replied that there was no one there. If he doesn't like it, he can try something else. Crassus shouted furiously, which he only said. His girlfriend screamed for Crassus to stop. Now is not the time for demand. The priestess said she was right. They should work together to cope. She added that they would run out of steam if they keep fighting each other like this. Rorin said that if they were coming, he advised them to hurry up. There was only one wagon left. They're going to take it to Hanza. Suddenly, he abruptly turned his head and looked behind Crassus's team. He shouted furiously for them to get down on the ground quickly. They're in big trouble. A huge monster that resembled the skeleton of a dragon appeared from behind. Angie stood behind everyone and asked what was wrong. The monster ran up to her and grabbed her. Crassus screamed in fright that Angie was there. Shocked, Rorin asked what kind of monster it was. Lapis said it looked like a bone dragon. Not only zombies, but this creature is on the loose. Everything is very strange. Angie thought furiously that she had been so careless. Somehow her body was still intact, but she couldn't let anyone else get hurt because of her mistake. Crassus excitedly shouted that Angie was there. The girl continued to reason that if they lost time here, then everything would be crawling with zombies again. She apologizes to Crassus. Their main task is to get out of here. Angie clenched her teeth in pain. Angie shouted at Layla and Laura to grab Crassus and get out of here. Crassus looked at her in shock and asked what she was talking about now. She wanted them to leave. Bro shouted that it was true. They need to get into the cart quickly. They need to leave. Rorin furiously shouted that he wanted him to leave his friend. No way in his life would he do that. The guy shouted that he was going after Angie. The dragon clenched its jaws, causing Angie to feel a new twinge of pain. She screamed loudly, but she couldn't get out. Crassus's girlfriend grabbed his hand and screamed loudly that it was absurd how they were going to do it. They won't be able to handle this monster, at least not right now. The priestess shouted at him to value his life. The girl looked at Angie in horror, but they really can't do anything. The priestess began to cry and clung to Crassus's hand. The guy was staring at poor Angie. Rorin looked at them and awkwardly asked what it was. Lapis asked tiredly what they should do. She added with displeasure, "What a harem cliché. Just use the power of friendship and everything will work out." The guy remembered Crassus's behavior and thought that his first impression was nothing special about this guy, but a little unpleasant. What he means is that leaving him behind wouldn't be such a bad idea. Rorin said that, on the other hand, he understands what it's like to lose someone, so it's hard to just let that happen. Lapis laughed and said she didn't hate it in him, he understood. The guy thought he really knew what that feeling was. He asked how they should act. It's impossible to beat him, right? Besides, they are just ordinary mercenaries, but if they don't act quickly, this girl's life will be in danger. Lapis said that the bone dragon doesn't need to eat anything alive to survive. Instead, they prefer the negative emotions of living creatures, such as resentment, suffering, and sadness, which is why he did not kill the girl right away. She added that nevertheless, they cannot afford to spend more time. On the count of 3, he'll shoot something to distract him. At this time, he can do something with it. The guy looked at her in surprise and said that he thought he could only use healing. Lapis said that she had just picked up a new ability. Rorin shouted that he understood. The guy ran at the bone dragon with great speed. Lapis put her hands out and began to summon magic. She thought she could start counting, alone. Crassus looked in shock at Rorin, who ran past him. He didn't expect to see him now. Lapis thought it was 2. She began to create more streams of magic. Rorin looked into the dragon's eyes. Lapis thought it was 3. She raised her arms high and shouted that in the name of the Lord, she was called to shine the holy light. Crassus shouted in shock what it was. His girlfriend said it was the same. The dragon continued to hold the girl in his teeth. Rorin approached him, shouting that the magic of purification. The guy began to hit the monster with his huge sword with great force. He excitedly thought that now. Rorin managed to chop the bone that was the dragon's leg. Rorin thought tensely that he had to crush the foundation. The guy quickly headed for the dragon's head. He looked at the girl for a second and then hit the monster. The guy shouted furiously that this was a deadly bait, and now he had to die. Rorin began to fiercely strike blow after blow at the monster's head in order to pierce it. He snatched the girl out of his mouth and quickly jumped down. Crassus looked at him in shock and shouted what was going on. Rorin shouted furiously at him not to slow down. Crassus screamed loudly and ran after the guy. Rorin shouted to Lapis that they were running to the carriage. The girl said loudly that she understood. She took the wounded, they can go. Rorin jumped into the carriage, which was already full of people. He breathed wearily and looked at the monster. He was shocked to think that his legs had recovered. He said he was glad that he was made entirely of bones and couldn't fly. Someone asked if dragons didn't fly with their magic power. Rorin furiously asked if he was capable of flying or not. Lapis said with displeasure that there was no difference. The horse is slower and cannot accelerate. He'll catch up with them. Andy screamed loudly when his back came into contact with the side of the wagon. Crassus excitedly shouted that Angie was getting worse. They can't slow down a bit. Bros shouted that he was a fool. If they slow down a bit, he'll get them. Crassus screamed in fright that Angie was going to die. They had to save her now. Bros grabbed the guy by the shirt and shouted loudly that otherwise they would all die. He understands that they will die, and then together they will become holy martyrs. Rorin watched them intently. He turned to the priestess from Crassus's team. Rorin asked tensely that she hadn't asked if there was a supreme shrine nearby. The girl looked at him in surprise. He asked her if she was still able to use magic. Then she can maintain her condition. Bros asked that he was sure, but if he started a battle with this dragon, then without the magic of the servant of the supreme sanctuary, he was doomed. Rorin said that they had lost the battle from the very beginning. Even if they do something, the result will remain unchanged. Crassus asked in surprise what he was doing. He said that the nearest supreme shrine is in the opposite direction, therefore. Rorin replied that even if they died, they could not turn away from the path. The guy sat down next to Lapis. He looked at the street and thought that this was a failure. Nothing was visible. Rorin looked up at the sky and thought that the clouds had finally parted and the moon had come out. The dragon is still chasing them. He continued to argue that now, in any case, you can't move around. You need to keep up speed. Lapis screamed loudly that she understood. Rorin wondered what it was. The girl continued to drive the cart at the same speed. Rorin noticed that she had driven around a tree she hadn't even seen. He was shocked to think that she drove around the tree because she saw him. Rorin thought that if he remembered their last trip, she had prosthetics instead of eyes. The guy looked at her in shock and asked if she really saw everything. Lapis smiled broadly and said loudly that, of course, she sees everything as well as ever. The girl winked at the guy so that he would be sure of her skills. Lapis said it was strange that others hadn't noticed it at all, although it was rather suspicious. He can tell everyone that this dragon has good night vision. If this is not the case, they will have to put their imagination and intuition on their side anyway. Rorin said tensely that this would give them an understanding of how best to do it. Lapis waved her hand and said that maybe then. She was silent for a second. The girl said that they should throw this stupid red-haired child out of the cart. Rorin asked her what she meant about Crossus. She replied that it was obvious. Crossus and his friend watched the priestess's actions and Angie's condition. The priestess used magic to maintain Angie's condition. Crassus asked what was wrong with her. The girl replied that she was no longer able to heal her. The guy sadly told Angie not to die. Crassus closed his eyes and said he was begging her. Crassus grabbed him and told him not to get sour in the middle of a battle. The guy shouted in shock what he was doing. Rorin asked why he cared. The guy added that he should go. Crassus was shocked to think what he was doing. Lapis grabbed his clothes with one hand. Crassus screamed at her to stop. The girl threw him forward with all her might. Crassus flew out of the cart and managed to grab the horse's neck. He screamed loudly in fear. The guy did not understand what she was doing. Crassus thought fearfully that if he fell, he would either fall under the wheels of a cart or be trampled by a horse. He tightened his grip on the horse's neck to keep from falling. He shouted furiously at what they were doing at all. Lapis shouted for him to use his speed boost power while he was on horseback. Crassus noticed that she waved the whip. The girl hit him and screamed at him to move faster. The horse screamed loudly when it heard the sound of a blow. Lapis did her best to bring Crassus to his senses. She shouted loudly that if he didn't do anything now, the dragon would catch up with them. He only needs to use his strength to increase the horse's speed. Crassus was shocked to ask what he was suggesting to do with a living being. Lapis replied loudly that there was no time for chatter. He had to do it now, or the dragon would turn them into meat. Crassus asked if he could let those who saved them die. Even if it helps, it doesn't matter. He grabbed the horse's neck tightly and used his strength. The horse quickly rushed forward. Lapis screamed that wow, they were speeding up. He can add more speed. They should never relax. They must continue until dawn. Lapis said that this dragon belongs to the type of evil spirits that weakens from sunlight. Therefore, after the sun rises, the dragon must stop chasing them. After all, sunlight will significantly weaken it. Crassus's friends excitedly shouted what they were doing to their master. Boris asked wearily what about the supreme sanctuary. Senna walked over to Rorin, who hugged her tightly. Lapis whipped the guy and screamed that at least they wouldn't die. Crassus used his strength, and the horse ran even faster. He'll spend the whole night like this. Rorin opened his eyes after sleeping and looked outside. He looked up at the sky and saw the bright sun. The guy excitedly thought that it was already morning. They had been on the road for so long. He looked at the sun and thought that they had barely come off, although very successfully. The priestess approached Rorin and said that he seemed to have 9 lives. Rorin gently touched Senna and said with a smile that she had fallen asleep recently. He looked at the other team members and asked how they were doing. He saw Bros sitting to the side with his head down. Rorin excitedly asked what was going on with the cast. The man was breathing heavily and moaning in pain. Cross's friend replied that she did not know. It hadn't been long since their escape, and as time went on, he only got worse. He fainted and never regained consciousness. He asked what they were trying to heal. The girl replied that Laura tried very hard to cure him. However, there was no effect. She gave her a chance to rest. Angie didn't get any better, even after the second attempt to heal her. The girls lowered their heads sadly. Rorin looked at them intently and thought that the reason why the two were knocked out of action was unknown to them. What kind of bad luck? Lapis said that Mr. Rorin Ude got up. What an incredible morning. Rorin thought that the horse seemed to be fine, but Crassus was not. He asked how long it would take them to arrive in Hanza. Lapis replied that she didn't know if they were going the right way at all. There is only one road to the city here, and it goes straight ahead. If they haven't lost their way, then everything is fine. Lapis said he hoped there would be nothing like this ahead. He said it was good that she was fine, but at night she had said something about fabrics and asked for as many as possible. Lapis confidently said that he was lying. Lapis said that apparently men like to be beaten by such cute and beautiful creatures as a girl. Rorin replied that he didn't like it at all. The girl said it was good. Lapis stared ahead and then called Rorin. She handed him the reins and asked if he could make the horse run straight, if he could do it. Rorin said she could move over. He will sit forward. He spent most of the night awake, terribly tired. The guy sat down next to the girl and said yes, that's it. Lapis handed him the reins. Rorin excitedly replied that she was right. The guy thought tensely that it was still quite cramped for two, but he could bear it. Rorin told the girl that if she wanted to rest, it was best to climb onto the roof of the wagon. There it was possible. Lapis screamed that she didn't. She snuggled up to him and rested her head on his shoulder. She said she was fine here. Rorin replied that this was not the case at all. He didn't push her away anyway so that Lapis could get some rest. The guy carefully drove the cart forward so that they got there in one piece.